Welcome to Raging Bullets, Pop Culture and Whatnot, episode 493. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge. I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the Whatnot Segulin, the Duke of and the elder statesman of the podcast.
How's it going, eh?
This is our lost episode. Because I can't count. You know what it is? Whenever we record the components of this podcast, we record an opening and a closing and voicemails and any other content we save along the way as different files. Well, at some point in time, I made an episode 493 closing file. So when I was going through my list in order to save the episode, I ended up saving it as 494 because of a typo. It really was a typo. So in an interest of, because we're heading so close to 500, I think previously, because it's funny, I would have left the episode as like a lost episode where you and I could have talked about it on the show and been like, yeah, do you remember when we said this on 493? I mean, that would have been a funny thing to do. But I'm so excited to be hitting 500 actual episodes that I don't want to miss one. So we're going to actually release our lost episode 493. Joining us on this episode is going to be longtime friend of the show, Chad Cicconi, as he's going to be talking about his work on Blue Hour. And this is something that you and I got to talk when Chad joined us ages ago to talk about Fracture. We got to talk to him about this book. So it's exciting to see this finally come to fruition, to talk about some of his upcoming work after Blue Hour as well. But what we do is we tease the first issue of Blue Hour, and the Blue Hour trade is coming out. So it's a great way, if you've never read Blue Hour, to join us on this episode, learn a little bit about why you should be excited about Blue Hour, and then jump on board the trade. The trade is coming out May 10th. So this is a great teaser episode to get in and join in the discussion about Blue Hour and why you should pick it up. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network, the League of Comic Book Podcasts, and the InfiniteComics.com podcast partnership. Mr. Segulin, sponsoring this episode is once again DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. What's going on over at DCBService.com?
Well, we're right now in that cool part of the month when they're getting ready for the new line coming out, and you're wondering what's going to come out. But we always know what they always will have for us, and those are bundles. Now, it's one of the great ways that you can get your comics, and I absolutely love my bundles, and I am always grateful to DCBS for the bundles. But remember, they're not just home for comics. I also get my statues there. I get action figures there. You can pick up movies there. It's a total service comic book website, and or if you want to call it your local shop, just it's a local shop online. I absolutely love those guys. So thank you, DCBS.
Over at InStockTrades.com, this is my place where I catch books that I miss. I mentioned on this episode, I'm a big fan of Absolute Editions. Absolute Preacher hardcover volume 2. 50% off, only $75. If you are collecting Absolute Editions, they're costly, but you're buying a premium, oversized book that really is that piece that's going to sit on a shelf and be able to, it's a great coffee table book. I page through mine constantly. I love the Absolute Edition because I'm an art junkie, and Steve Dillon artwork, along with the Garth Ennis work, I mean, it's a great series for this. So it's 50% off, only $75. Ever After from the Pages of Fables, Volume 1 trade paperback, Pandora, 50% off, only $8.49. Superwoman trade paperback, Volume 1, Who Killed Superwoman? This is the Rebirth series, 50% off, only $8.49. It's a great when you miss something to be able to catch them at 50% off because we're all on a budget. It's a great way to get it. So thank you, InStockTrades.com and DCBService.com for supporting our show. Mr. Segulin, what kind of a podcast are we?
Pop Culture and Whatnot, a division of Raging Bullets, is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot of Action Labs' Blue Hour. So if you haven't read the book, what are you waiting for? Come on. Would Sean and I steer you wrong? It's a good read. You will enjoy it. So pick it up, read it, and then listen to the show. This way, you can better enjoy the show.
Let's talk Blue Hour.
Carter Hall, scientific genius from a far-off world, flies into action as Hawkman.
Joining us is longtime friend of the show, Chad Cicconi, as we're going to be discussing his work on the Action Lab release, Blue Hour. And this is something, I don't remember, Chad, one of the things with you, and I've known you for a long time now, going back to Comic Geek Speak Super shows where I met you, and I got to know your artwork buying art cards from you, and really got to know you then from Fracture and things like that. So we've had a long history together now. First of all, definitely welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Blue Hour is something we talked about. I don't remember if we talked about it on the podcast or if it was an after the podcast kind of discussion where you talked about this sci-fi epic that you were working on, this mini-series. And I always get excited when I get an opportunity to talk to you because you share projects that you're working on, and I get excited for them because they're always unique. There's always a chance to see you grow. You are a true artist, and it's one of the things I love about the comic book medium is my favorite artists are people that I get to go along on the ride and see, their initial work and see it grow and over time. And I've seen that in every work that you've done. Blue Hour is absolutely no exception to it with all the different races and characters. This is definitely a sci-fi epic, which is right up my alley. And I'm so glad to see this finally come to fruition. So congratulations on Blue Hour. And can you tell us a little bit about where Blue Hour came from?
Sure. And you're able to see the progression in my work, and I give you sneak peeks at things, and then you have to wait so long because it takes me so long to finish it. Blue Hour came about because when I had finished the second volume of Fracture, the superhero book I had done for Action Lab, Sean Gabarine and I did 2 volumes of that. I was kind of sick of doing superhero stuff. I wanted to do something different, and I didn't have anything in mind. So literally, I went to a couple of the artist community websites and just sort of posted up to say, look, I'm a published comic book artist looking for a new project. I'm not necessarily looking for a page rate. I'm looking to sort of share ownership in a book with somebody. Are any writers out there interested in working with me? And I put up some samples of my stuff from Fracture and other stuff I had done. I got a good number of people responding to me because, very frankly, for a writer, it's often difficult for them to find an artist to work on a book with them if they have an idea for a book, because most of the artists, frankly, are looking for a page rate for an independent book that's not going through Marvel or DC where they're paying a page rate. The writer ends up having to pay the artist to do the book, and any artist that's any good is going to be very expensive for a writer. So when I just kind of posted up, hey, I'm looking for something and I'm not a project and I'm not looking for a page rate, I did get a lot of people who were emailing me saying, sure, let's talk. And the writer of Blue Hour, whose name is Dino Caruso, and he's from up around Toronto, Canada, he emailed me, one among probably 8 or 10 different folks who contacted me with thoughts on projects they wanted to work on. And I think I had mentioned in my post that I didn't want to do anything superhero. I wanted to try something different. And I think he kind of pitched me 2 different ideas for series. And I frankly, at this point, it's been so long ago, I don't remember what the other one was. But he gave me just a little paragraph on what turned into Blue Hour, and it wasn't called Blue Hour at the and it was intriguing to me, sort of a sci-fi with some Western themes to it, an opportunity to do alien species and not too far future stuff, but a little grittier stuff that was just kind of a projection of current modern day technology into the future a little bit. There are some flying cars in the book and things like that, but our folks are kind of in a war surplus mode, so they don't have a lot of that stuff in the colony they eventually found. So I thought it was an interesting project, and he sent me the script, and I looked it over, and we actually talked about it and bounced ideas around. And I agreed to work with him on it, and slowly we put it together.
That's one of the things that I really admire about you, and I would say this about anybody in comics. I think it's one of those mediums where getting your project to completion, I think, is a struggle. You know, you alluded to the fact you work full time. I mean, and you know, not only do you have a full time job, you work you work with Action Lab. You've got, I mean, on the cover credits inside there, not only are you a creator on this, you work behind the scenes at Action Lab as well, and you are a creator at Action Lab. It's one of the challenges, I think, is being able to, with doing everything else, complete a comic project. I think so many people walk into comics with great ideas. There's that struggle. It's one of the things I like about your story is you've always stuck with it, and you've always gotten these really cool projects to completion. And, you joke around about, your pacing and all that. I'm not an artist. And I think one of the reasons why I've always been a comic fan, sure if I had from time to time the desire to maybe create a comic and write one or draw one. Yeah, but here's what it is. I didn't have the drive. And I think that's really important. You have to have, first of all, I think you have to have artistic talent. You have to have a style, which you have. And you also have to have that drive, though, to persevere when it's difficult and challenging to make sure you get to the end. And I would say that's true of writers, artists, colorists, inkers, everybody who's involved in comics. How do you get yourself to the point where you can maintain that work ethic? You set aside that time. How do you make that happen? Because there's sacrifices that go into making a project like Blue Hour, and your other work, obviously, come to fruition. And I love seeing your table at the comic conventions because you have a really great variety of work on your table now. So,
it's taken a while, and a couple comments on what you just said. First, you mentioned talent. I think I'm living proof of the fact that the proportion of talent to just perseverance is widely variable, because if you look at my stuff when I first started, you might see a spark of something in there, but it's wildly different from what I'm doing now in terms of the quality of it. If you just keep at it long enough, I think you can improve, and I think I have. I hope I have. But in terms of getting a project done, my situation gives me both a disadvantage and an advantage over a lot of other artists. My situation is I have a full-time job that I'm very happy with. I don't have any aspirations of being a full-time somebody drawing a comic for pay at Marvel or DC and making my living as an artist. So I devote 2 or 3 hours in the evening, every evening, to my drawing. So the disadvantage is a guy 20 years younger than me, or a woman who's trying to bust their hump to become a professional artist and make their name in this, they're working 8 hours a day. So they're improving and working faster than I am in terms of putting out product and maybe pushing their art form forward. However, the advantage I have is that I don't have to do a lot of stuff that they have to do to try to make their living doing this. A young artist or an up-and-coming artist or somebody who's trying to make their living doing it has to do a lot more stuff than I do in terms of getting out to conventions and taking little side projects for small pay to kind of keep themselves going until they make a name. I have the luxury of I'm not necessarily trying to do this as a living, so I can just pick my project and slowly progress on it and doggedly continue it until it's done. And I don't have to interrupt it with, I got to pay the bills, so I got to take this other side project and put my passion project on hold for 6 months, like a lot of artists end up having to do. So, like I say, it's a disadvantage and an advantage that when I pick a project, I know it might take me 2 years to do 5 or 6 issues of it, but I know I have the perseverance and the ability to just continue working for that period of time uninterrupted and get the book done. And that's basically how Fracture went. We put out 7 issues of Fracture over a couple of 1-year periods with a year in the middle. And we got the project finished. I'm proud of that work. But if we were trying to do a monthly book for some page rate for pay company, I'd have never been able to do it that fast.
Do you think it helps? Because I'm looking at the whole team of Action Lab, just on the cover credits on the inside when it flips open, and so many of you have comic experience, a widely diverse comic experience. Do you think it helps when you're running a company like Action Lab? Because the success of Action Lab, and I know I'm kind of jumping to this right now, but it was something that you said that sparked the company, and it's something I admire about it quite a bit. Action Lab, I saw it when it started, and I've watched it grow and into, just create your own properties, getting diverse movie properties and, just a wide variety of properties from across various medium over to the company. Just the success of the company growing. Do you think it helps that you've got so many people involved behind the scenes who really understand both sides of comics? And what I mean by that is, the creator side, the business side of it. I think there's an interesting marriage of it. Just hearing you talk, I'm always impressed by you, because I've had many conversations with you, in your ability to look at and say, I really enjoy creating comics. It's an art form of mine. I dedicate myself every night to creating comics. I'm well aware of the fact that I am not going to be devoting the 8-hour day. But you devote 2 to 3 hours of dedicated time, and I think that is a message to up-and-coming artists where you're saying, listen, if you really want to break into this art form, you have to persevere. You have to set aside time, no matter what that time is. If you can set aside 8, that's what you're going to be doing if you want to make a career at this, and it's going to be a struggle. And that message was loud and clear. But you also sent the message that, listen, if all you can set aside is 2 to 3 hours a night, and you really want to produce a product and get something to the end, you can do it. It is about perseverance. It's about dedication. It's about sticking to that time. And I think that's something that's, when I look across the names involved in Action Lab, everybody there has produced product that I find very interesting as I'm looking across the names there.
That perseverance story applies equally to Action Lab, because right. I think I've told this story before, and I might have told it on this podcast. When we started, we were 4 comic creators who were all putting out our little solo books by ourselves, selling the same 300 copies to the same 300 people, and bumping into each other at show after show, and just kind of shaking our heads at the bar afterwards, going, how do we expand this? How do we increase our reach? The combined efforts of all of us together, and bringing in one person, a friend of mine who was a business person and not a comics creator, was sort of the magic mix that allowed us to have the collective understanding of how to put together a comic, how to produce it, all the technical stuff of, drawing, writing, editing, coloring, lettering, and all that stuff, and a little bit of the business sense sprinkled in from the gentleman who's now our CEO, Brian Seaton. And it was all about perseverance, because there are innumerable hurdles to a brand new comic book company that we had to just confront each as they came. Like, how do we get into the Diamond catalog? Because that ain't easy for a little comic company that's just starting, that doesn't have any track record of success. How do we print our books at a price that can sustain us into continuing? Because when you're first starting out and you have low print runs, in the hundreds or low thousands, there's very few options out there of how to get things printed that you can sell at a price into the direct market that would allow you to sustain that. And we had to come up with creative solutions to all those problems and knock down those hurdles one by one. And it was just the collective stick-to-itiveness of the 4 or 5 of us at the time. And then after we cleared some of those hurdles and got some credibility and got a few more titles under our belt, we brought in people like Jamal Igle after a year or 2 that lended us additional credibility and additional competency and additional scope and presence in the comics industry, and just slowly build it piece by piece.
Brought Jamali danger.
That's right.
Love.
That's right. And that was one of 5 or 6 things over those first 3 years of Action Lab that kind of dragged us from obscurity into, okay, people have heard of us. Okay, our sales are going up. Okay, wait, there was an Eisner nomination for these people. Who are they? You just have to hit those milestones, and there's a lot of companies that started the same time we did that are gone now because those hurdles are not easy to clear.
I think that's one of the great things that I like about Action Lab. It's seeing that perseverance, seeing the growth. And I'm a comic fan across the board. I've shared on the show many times, and obviously with people who've met me in person. I'm not just a DC fan. I love comics. I love the medium. And I believe it can do anything. When you were talking at the beginning, I don't want to do another superhero comic. I want to do something else to kind of branch out and try something different. As a reader, I connect with that. because I love a diverse comic library. I love superhero comics. I'm always going to be a superhero comics fan. But, I love everything across comics. I like when people take risks and try something new and put out something different. My movie tastes and my television tastes are the same way. I have incredibly diverse movie and television tastes. And
for an artist, in particular an artist in my situation, that's a very important decision. You might have heard discussions. There's recently been discussions about, who gets more credit, writers versus artists, and how writers and artists pick their projects. And, one of the things people talk about is, well, a writer can write 5 books in a month, but an artist can only draw 1. For the artist, the decision on what project you're going to work on, if you want to draw a comic book, is probably more important than a writer for that reason. And for me, who has less time devoted than the standard artist and takes me longer to complete something, it's even more important if I want to broaden my catalog, so to speak, and get different types of comics. I got to pick right, because if I have a project that I'm doing 5 issues, that's going to take me a year and a half. So I have to budget my time very wisely.
And I think that's one of the nice things about getting to know your projects is the fact that I feel like I go on a journey when I read your books, because I feel like there's a lot of depth to them. I feel like you choose projects that have importance to them and characters that I really enjoy and like. And it's not just one. It's always a cast of characters where you're trying... Excuse me, I'm going to edit that piece out. Got a frog in my throat. It's always characters who are unique and interesting. And I think that's something that's important with projects. I kept talking about movie and television characters and projects, and I think there's a link to that between comics. I think it's a genre very similar to, or I shouldn't say genre, it's a delivery medium very similar to how television is, how film is, where you can tell any kind of story in comics. And when you look at Action Lab's output, I think it's representative of what I like as a fan about comics in general. It's Action Lab seems... Go ahead.
We hope that's true. And if the characters in the books I've done are interesting, I can take probably a third of the credit for that, because I would have come up with the look and visual presentation. But obviously on Blue Hour and Fracture and the other projects I've done up to the thing I'm working on now, most of it's been the writer in terms of the development of the character and the attitudes and the storyline surrounding the characters. So I hope and feel I've chosen wisely in the writers I'm working with too.
Here's something that I was wondering about with Blue Hour, because one, I absolutely love this story. So I was sitting there, and for me, it's a very enjoyable just to do the read through, then go back do my art read through, because I do love your art style. You've got that great classic comic book feel to it that you're like, this is old school, but it's not, an old comic. It's, brought up to the modern day, but it still has, that homage to what is a classic, feel and look for a comic. But the thing that, especially in this book that was done, that I absolutely loved are non-traditional panels. Because you guys did a lot of overlapping on the panels and irregular size and different layouts with the breakdown. Now, that kind of stuff, is that in script? Is that you going, hey, let's try this? Is that collaboration with you and the writer going, hey, try this? What about that?
That's mostly me. I'll take credit for that. The scripts from Dino were panel to panel with dialogue, and occasionally he would say, large panel or full page splash when we had one of those, or double page splash. But he did leave the panel layouts to me, and those irregularly shaped panels. That's my standard technique, unless something calls for a very specific panel layout. I like doing those kind of skewed panels sometimes, or overlapping panels. I'll try often to use the panel layout to direct the reader's eye. I mean, you hear artists talk about trying to direct the reader's eye around the page. I try to use the panel layouts to do that. Sometimes it works better than other times. Sometimes I'll try to do something a little more creative, like if you're looking at issue 1 of Blue Hour, there's one double page spread where I did almost a mirror image panel layout, just to try to reflect the story and drive the story. So those panel layouts are very conscious, but that's just one of the techniques I like to use when I'm drawing comics. I like to make it a little more interesting than the traditional, 6 or 4 or 9 panel grids. There are times when I do those straight grids if this, if the story calls for it or the mood calls for it. But like for action pages or pages where something exciting or strange is going on, I tend to skew the panels or angle the panels or make them geometric shapes rather than squares. For the same reason that in the old Batman TV series, they would put the camera at a canted angle to just take the reader off center a little bit.
Well, it works well for the story, by the way. So that was something that I really did enjoy on my read-throughs on throughout the series was, just again, I do a regular read-through, then I go back and I do an art read-through where I just look at the pictures. I don't look at any words. And I just look at the artwork. And then I do another read-through where, again, I'm reading everything and taking everything in. And, one of the things that I got to say on this one, my art read-through was very enjoyable just because it was a little, because you did, you took, a little bit off, kilter. And you did the skewing of the panels, the overlapping, that one double page spread that you had where they show the colony. I absolutely loved, that page. That for me was just an absolute wonderful, just, look to it. Cause you're like, oh yeah, okay, there. Yeah. That for me was a really cool look.
Yeah. I enjoyed that double page spread. And looking back at issue 1, I'll give some credit to our colorist who did a good amount of heavy lifting on this issue. There were some difficult things. We had 2 different colorists on the series. For issue 1, which we did issue 1, and then we had some delays before we started issue 2, and our colorist couldn't continue. But issue 1 was done by a woman named Francesca Zambone, and I think she is from Italy. I remember a call we had with her, and listening to her speaking was very interesting. But, for example, in issue 1, there's some pages here where I have multiple sort of layers of things going on in the same panel that are a coloring challenge. There's a scene in a boardroom on a high floor of a high-rise. There's a full floor-to-ceiling window in the background. So in that scene, we have a foreground where the characters are talking, and then there's these floating transparent view screens upon which they're talking to aliens from the other planet. And then behind them is the window, and outside the window there's like ships and flying cars going by. So for the colorist, there were 5, 6 different planes of color that the colorist had to adjust to, and levels of transparency. So there was some of that in some of the later issues, but issue 1 was one of the bigger coloring challenges. Looking back, it's been a while since I drew issue 1, so I can now look back and appreciate it a little and not hate my own artwork. But I'm kind of recalling the significant contribution that the colorist made. And that double page spread you were mentioning, I'm looking at the sky and the 2 suns, and really I'm reminded by how much of a contribution the colorist made.
As you're talking about this book and switching to different colors, I know we're going to be talking mainly about issue 1, but I do want to talk about that. When you start off in a first issue and you've got kind of a flow going and a creative team, and actually I'm gonna weigh in really quick on the whole our controversy lately, and I'm not going to ask you to do it because I don't want to put you in that position. But my take has always been, as a comic fan, the best books are the ones where the creative team gels. And it's every member of the creative team is an equal part of the final product. Those are the ones that you can tell are special issues. I don't care if it's the one that sells the most. It's the one that I, as a fan, connect with the most. Because as I'm paging through it, the dialogue speaking to me, the art speaking to me, the colors, every little element of the way it was laid out just grabs me. So there isn't an expendable piece of that puzzle. Sometimes it's one that's put together by a singleton person, or mainly by a single person, in the sense that the writer and artist and maybe even colorist are the same person. But other times it's a team that just the energy's there, the understanding of the message that's being told is there, and it speaks to me. So the books, the ones that feel disjointed, where it feels like it's just the writer, it's just the artist, I can appreciate if I like that talent, that's why I picked it up. But I'm always saying I picked that up for the art. I picked that up for the writing. It doesn't have the same resonance as a project where everything just gelled together. So that's kind of my take on the whole thing, and it's an honest take, because I really do know that those are the projects that stand out to me more. They might lead me to pick up something written by somebody over and over again, no matter who their artist is. It may lead me to follow the art elsewhere. I have colorists that I follow now, just because I've gotten a little bit more in tune, where I will pick up something and go, wow, I recognize that colorist, and I really like the way that they draw colors, which is something I never thought I'd be doing as a fan, but there's a truth to that now for me.
And I agree mostly with what you just said. Mm-hmm. The only thing I would add is comics being a visual medium and not me being an artist, it is easier for me to get some enjoyment out of a book where the art is good and the writing might be bad than it is for me to enjoy a book where the writing is good but the art is bad. But I agree, the best ones are the ones that are hitting on all cylinders. But I am a little biased toward the art.
Well, and I think lately the comments, when I was reading them, for myself, they really were kind of downplaying the art, and I'm like, that's insane.
Well, there's no getting around the fact that, you know, in the 80s and 90s, the quote-unquote superstars of the industry were the artists. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact of the comics industry, and now the quote-unquote superstars are more the writers. And, you know, I'm not bitter about that or anything. I was never going to be a superstar artist, even if the industry was still the way it was. But that's just a fact of life, and I'll leave it to the internet and the commentators to explain why that change happened. But that's just the way the industry's working.
And I think it's an industry that you'll see lots of shifts over time, where I think it will be based. Honestly, I hope
the worm
we do.
will turn.
Well, I hope it does, because you know what that says? The industry's been around for a while. I think it's an industry that I want. Well, not I think it's an industry I want it to be around 50 years from now. I want to be old and gray, putting my teeth in a jar. And
this tension's been there since Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and earlier than that. So it's not like we're talking about anything new.
I'm just, honestly, it's a medium that I think if you remove the quality from one, the medium suffers. So,
you're right.
And I really, I think this book is a great example of that. Because I love the marriage. Jim was talking about his art read through. I love the marriage of this dialogue with this incredible, like, I'm watching the action sequence in the beginning, and that really drew me in with Wardell, because, I am such a space opera junkie. I grew up loving Flash Gordon and all of that. I actually got, sitting over here, I got, there's collections that have been released over and over again of the Flash Gordon comic strips, the original ones. And I finally started picking them up from Amazon. As a kid, I went to the library, and that was one of my ones. I didn't have a comic budget for anything, obviously, beyond my Uncanny X-Men subscription that I was getting and Batman. So I would go to the library, and a lot of times there was old collections of Marvel and DC that were hardcover that were really unique of old material. But then there was also the old comic strips that were bound. And the Flash Gordon stuff and Buck Rogers I really was into. This bar scene was so classic, that kind of stuff. And I loved that because it wasn't... It was its own unique thing. It felt very contemporary. It felt like something out of some of our recent sci-fi television shows, but it felt classic and pulpy too. And it was that marriage of all of that together, feeling contemporary with that classic feel, that really drew me in. It was the art and the dialogue. You just knew. I'm like, Wardell's going to be the guy that I'm just, from this moment on, I am going to love following him, no matter what happens with him, just because he's my Han Solo of this almost.
That's good to hear, because I had never drawn a bar fight before, and I remember struggling with that scene mightily. And again, the colorist did some good work on those pages, and looking back on them, I'm okay with how it turned out.
When you It's funny because one of the things that I really enjoy about you, because I like our artwork. I mean, I've known your artwork for years. I meant genuinely everything I said before, where I've enjoyed watching the growth of it. When you go back through and you see your work now, I loved that you were able to say, I can look back at issue 1 and appreciate it. Because that's got to be an occupational hazard when you work in a creative medium, where you're trying to push
You need to get
yourself.
a little distance. I'm at the point now where I don't look back on this and hate it. Like some of my earlier stuff, I know it's decent. I'm not going to say it's great, but when I look back on, my first work in Baby Boomers or something, I look through those and I kind of just cringe when I see the pages. I'm like, oh, this was terrible, because your eye changes, your sensibility changes. I looked at those in 2007 and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I can't believe I'm doing this well. But now I look back on them and I'm like, oh, how could I have even thought that? And that's probably not apparent to anybody else that looks at it, because I still have that book and people pick it up off my table sometimes and they still enjoy it. But it's hard to look at something right after you've completed it, because all you see is the tedium. All you remember is the tedium of doing panel to panel and all the choices you made and didn't make on a page. So in order to look at your own work and appreciate it and enjoy it at all, you do have to get a little distance from it. So like issue 5 of Blue Hour that's just come out, I did that a little too recently to kind of look at it and appreciate it. I'm still kind of frustrated with all the choices I had to make. Issue 1, was a year earlier than that, and it's now to the point where I can look at this and I don't remember actually drawing each one of these panels. So I can just sort of read this as a comic book now and kind of look back and say, yeah, I kind of like how this came out.
One of the things I do want to note, you mentioned issue 5. Blue Hour is being collected, and it's coming out in the beginning of May, correct?
Mid-May, I believe. I'm not certain exactly which week, but in May, pretty soon.
Okay. We will announce on the show, actually, when it's released, but one of the things we're doing right now is we're doing a teaser. We're going to talk cover to cover, as we're starting to do, about issue 1. And it's a great opportunity to kind of tease the book for people who haven't had an opportunity to be exposed to it, but also really to pick your brain on the background of these characters and some of your layout designs, because we're talking about this bar fight, and I loved it. And it really felt very cinematic to me, to the point where it introduced me to Wardell. It introduced me to the idea that there's a lot of factions in this world. No matter what race you are, race isn't the right thing, no matter what species you are, because we've got aliens that are in here that have the same faction systems going on. I think it just goes to show you that culture's driven by this, based on belief, based on upbringing, based on survival. And it's interesting to see how this book so plays on some of the things that I think are very contemporary issues in our society now. Your heroes are your ones where you're like, they're not always clean. They've had issues with their best friends, and sometimes they have to go through healing to come back together and a chance for a new hope, a new direction. And I really enjoy that about this series.
You didn't just say A New Hope, did you?
I did just say A New Hope, and I really wasn't. I really was not intending to make a Star Wars reference, but it went there, and I really wasn't doing it because this is a space book. It just, I do think that's what brings him together with some of his friends, and I really, timing wise, that was pretty good. There's a question I have coming out of this one. Where do you get your inspiration with scenes? Like when you're doing a scene like this, this is a motion scene to me. And I think it's something that I really enjoyed about the artwork in this, because you talked about how it was your first bar fight. I need to see that in motion. I need to feel like there's an intensity going on here. And there's a lot of stuff that you've got to make me convinced are happening in between panels. Because there's this sense, and I loved that about this, there is a heavy sense of motion. Like in the first panel, there is a guy lifted up over a guy's head. Look out below. You see in the next panel, he's already been thrown. In my mind, I was watching that happen. I really enjoyed that part. You're seeing, different fight sequences going on where characters who were in like the almost off to the side become part of the foreground and they're being choked. You see Wardell having a guy come up behind him and start, the whole battle between the two of them, where Wardell's beer bottle now is winding up in this guy's face. I really loved seeing how in every panel I was following different storylines that were happening and seeing motion that wasn't there. That's something I always appreciate, and that's what I think is successful in comic art because of the fact these aren't just meant to be singleton images. They're meant to take you through a story that's being unfolded in front of you. And you did that really well because of the fact that there were multiple little storylines that I was digging following in this, not just Wardell.
Well, how to describe this? That is one of the biggest challenges for me as a comic artist, and there's others who do this far superior to how I do it, but I try to make it as simple as possible. And really, it's about trying to control the viewer's eyes, where they're going, and the pace of what's happening. And I'm fairly simplistic in I usually try to have the reader do a Z pattern across the page. You've probably seen this in, I don't know, if you follow any art how-to books or how to do comics. And if you look at one of the pages, like there are deliberate choices on this first page of the bar fight. The first panel, the attempt is to have the reader's eye go from the left to the right, because you see the dialogue serves that. The way the panel's framed, if you look at how I put the bar in that image, it goes from upper left to lower right of the panel. So the natural flow of your eye when you're looking at that panel and reading the dialogue and looking at the action is from left to right. So you see Wardell, the bartender, your eye cruises down along the bar, you see those dialogue bubbles of the two guys fighting, and then your eye comes to rest for a moment on the guy holding the other guy up over his head. Now, to try to move the viewer's eye down the page, that guy holding the other guy up over his head is angled very slightly from upper right to lower left. Mm-hmm. So as your eye falls down him, it's leading you to the top right corner of the next panel. And the action in that panel flows from the left to the right. You see there's even an action mark. So your eye on those two panels goes from right to left and then left to right. And then you have some dialogue panels, and they're relatively vertical. So you read them, and then your eye should drop straight down, and the flow of the last panel. And this isn't even all that expertly done. These three panels in the middle do break it up a little, but the overall overarching eye flow on this page is you can just almost trace it with your finger, and you can see the little action lines are almost obviously doing it. Left to right across the top panel, diagonally down across the second panel, and then left to right across the bottom panel as Wardell smashes the guys. That's how you establish a sense of pace and a sense of rhythm. And I'm not always successful at doing that, but if you see a page and you feel that the action flowed right and you felt a sense of rhythm on it, you could probably look straight at it and analyze exactly what I've done to try to move your eye around the page, because that's how a page really sinks. And you can do that with any artist, any comic artist's work. You can see how they're trying to pace the action. That's often why I tilt the panels or set the page light the way it is, just to try to make your eye go where I want it to pace things. I
like that. I really like that. I actually feel that flow naturally. And I think that's the storylines that I was talking about were taking me through it. And I was really enjoying that aspect of this. I think when you have action on a page, you want to be able to follow all of the action and feel like it's there for a reason, not just there for...
Yeah.
You know, I mean, sometimes it's there for humor. Sometimes it's there to add to the sense of there being an atmosphere. And this had a lot of atmosphere to it, which is really important. Do you watch movies, television shows? Do you look at other comics? Is it a wide variety of things when you pull together an action sequence like this? Because you mentioned you were like, this is my first bar fight. So where did you get this from? Did it just come from your head? When you went to prepare yourself to do this, what did you do?
I didn't go to some movie and say, okay, I want to mimic this bar fight or I want the look and feel of this. I just tried to figure out what the important beats were, because all you have is the dialogue and a little bit of kind of narration of what's going on. So where to put everybody, and the script for this would have said something like, Wardell is standing at a bar and a fight breaks out around him. He's talking to the bartender while it goes on. Here's the dialogue, blah, blah, blah. Panel 2, a big guy approaches Wardell and grabs his shoulder and starts picking a fight and says blah, blah. And, panel 3, 4, and 5, small inset panels with dialogue. Panel 6, he smashes a beer bottle. So it's up to me to figure out what's in the foreground, what's in the background, what's big, what's small, which panels are big, which panels are small. So I really just, when I'm looking at a script, I try to say, okay, what is the important beats on this page? Because typically they should be the larger panels. What's just kind of moving the plot along? Stuff that you can gloss over quickly, just a panel with a head and a dialogue balloon in it oftentimes. So the first decision is which panels are big and which panels are small. And then I just try to figure out that there's other constraints on you, like the person who talks first usually needs to be on the left side of the panel or on one side of the panel. So you have to figure out, it's like a puzzle you have to fit together to say, okay, there's action in this panel, it needs to be going from this direction to this direction, and the dialogue needs to be from this character's mouth. So you just try to say, okay, this person has to be here, this person has to be here, action flowing in this direction, what's it going to look like? And it's just sort of a puzzle to fit in. And I'll often just draw a diagram of the room and figure out, all right, where's everybody standing, how's this going to work? And choreograph it like a dance or a puzzle or something to just fit it into the space you have on the page.
Now, with the characters in this series, did you go through... I know you like to do character models and get to know your characters as the series goes on. Did any of them change along the way as you were doing issue 1? Did you make any changes to them, or did you really stick with who they were? Because I really love the cast of characters, the main cast. Especially, Wardell's having, his little bar fight, and his buddy shows up former friend, I should say, shows up just in time. And this was the beat that I really liked. I liked the idea that we got to know Wardell, we got to see kind of the rough edge of everything, and then we started to get the idea of, okay, these are guys that used to be running buddies. Something happened between the two of them. He's coming to Wardell with an opportunity that, listen, we've both been, down our path together. Let's try it one more time and try to do it right, and try to learn from our mistakes. And I think we all have friends where we can look at our past and say either we've stuck together or maybe we haven't, that you can look back and say, geez, I wish I'd had the opportunity to do that. Or maybe we're lucky enough that we do. I think that's something anybody as a reader can connect with, and it becomes cool. Did these characters go through a lot of changes along the way?
Well, Dino and I had some back and forth about the original character designs. But once they were designed, other than some subtle changes on the security uniforms once they got to the colony, just little things like the cuffs or the epaulets on the shoulders changed a little bit after the initial designs. There was some changes in the Lamont character, Wardell's old war buddy who presents him the opportunity in that first scene. There was a little back and forth about how he would look, whether he was bald or not, because there was some concerns that there's going to be some flashbacks here where you see Wardell and Lamont younger, and he would obviously have hair in the younger scenes. So the question was, will you recognize it's the same guy? And I hope that came through with the hair color and the other cues. But there was some back and forth about how Lamont looked. Wardell's look was basically the same from almost the beginning. And I think there were a few tweaks on the costume of Lamont's wife, the Asian-looking woman who's on the cover. The color and the layout of her costume. But other than that, the look was pretty solid, basically, from the character designs on.
Well, and you talk about just the because it was an issue too. I think that we have the younger versions of them, and I got to tell you, I liked when I started reading that, I was able to tell, okay, that's him, and you see the younger version. So I like the fact that we did get some really good age progression, and even within issue 1, there's some changes in them for a couple.
Mm-hmm.
You got the initial opening, then you've got 2 years later, and then some more. 2 years later when they're on the colony, and it's you got to see a little bit more wrinkles on the face, a little bit more age on them, than it was in the very beginning of the book. And I think that was a really nice subtle touch on on the aging and their facial, makeup throughout, issue 1 as well as the younger versions of them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That was all intentional. That first scene in issue 2, the flashback to the war with the jetpack troopers, was fun to draw. That was another layout challenge, but just drawing people flying on jetpacks is always fun.
I really liked the introduction of the aliens in issue 1, where, it's 1 year later. We're starting to see this idea of settling at this crux 4. Humans having to live with an alien species. And they're obviously going to have different ideologies, different backgrounds, maybe different, food needs, all kinds of different things that can possibly go along with that. But, this is people, in a day and age where, we as a society view people coming into our country or going to other countries as this kind of leap. This is leaving our planet, and going on a different planet that belongs to somebody else, and really having to deal with that cultural change, developing brand new colonies, and developing a sense of trust when you don't have this rich history of, or even the camaraderie of, hey, we're the same. It's an interesting message nowadays, which I really quite like. Sci-fi is one of the things I've always loved about sci-fi. Sci-fi touches on social issues in a way and gets away with it in a way that I think very few mediums are able to get away with, and really make you think about how silly sometimes we are as people. In what we fight about. It really almost puts in your face. But hey, if you just zigged instead of zagged, look how cool everything would have been. And that's what I think one of the innately great things about, I think, science fiction. And I would say, I would actually bring that into comics in general. I think I've learned in my life, not to say that I'm perfect or anything, I'm far from it. I'm human. I make mistakes too. But I think I learned a lot about morality through this medium. And I think there's something to be said about that, in the sense that these wild, wacky characters, that when you're pulled into this medium and given a sense of reality, because I really started to believe in these cultures and started to follow these people and follow the fact that we've got this alien race that they're making this peace treaty with. And you just know that somebody's not going to like it. And it might be a few somebodies, but it looked like everything was going so well till we jumped to 2 years later and we start to see the reality. Hey, they got a colony going and all that, but not everything is what it seems. I really enjoyed the alien race introduction to it. What is it like to craft an alien race and to really try to get to know them? And because you're developing this sense of, with them, of different members of the alien race, different expressions.
These aliens were the thing we went back and forth most about, Dino and I, when we were developing the characters. And we did put a lot of thought in this, and there's no real science behind it, but I have in my head the whole sort of evolution of how these aliens came to be, and what you really can't tell. But if you look at the design of these aliens, in my mind, these aliens, their physiology has everything they need to survive in their head. And in fact, they evolved as just little slugs that were just what their current head is, and the entire rest of their body just evolved as a mechanism to move them around. And in fact, in my head, if you were to chop off the head of one of these aliens, it would still survive as just this crawling little head, because they have a mouth, a digestive system, and a reproductive system all in their head.
That's cool, because I'm looking at the pictures and I'm seeing what you're talking about. Yeah.
And later in the series, there's a scene where they're riding these very large beasts of burden, and the very large beasts of burden are just larger versions of this alien head that crawl around and are 10 feet tall.
I think one of the neat things about that, when you talk about it, it's one of the things I really liked about this series. I think there's times where aliens are, they're kind of created wacky looking and things like that, and there isn't a real sense. My favorite science fiction is where there's a real sense of aliens as a culture, where they're thought out. And I really felt that these aliens were thought out, to the point where I felt like when I was reading, and I was just reading about the aliens, I felt like I was watching their culture unfold with just as much richness as what was going on with the humans. And I think that's really important when you're establishing a new world, is for me to feel like I'm seeing all angles of it and I care about all angles of it, because that's the hook to get me back. And issue 1, it's funny how I think the onus on a series, when it's a limited series, as a reader, I'm in for a limited series once I start it, because there's usually a hook that pulls me in and I'm going to keep reading it. But my favorite ones are the ones with issue 1. By the time I get to the cliffhanger, I'm already heavily invested. There's enough going on that I care about the characters. I care about different factions. You guys accomplished a lot in this first issue without it feeling too busy, because I think that's a careful pacing piece too. I have to feel like there's a story flow without it getting too busy. How do you keep yourself from putting too much content in? I know that's kind of a strange thing to say, but I think that pace is important.
I'll give the writer the tip of the hat there. The scope of the content in issue 1 was largely his decision, which scenes went into issue 1, how much space we were going to give each scene to breathe. And there was a little trickiness here in that we had to introduce this little background scene with the bar fight, which happened on Earth, and then move to a year later and have the boardroom scene where they're negotiating the treaty, and then flash it forward again 2 years and set up the colony and introduce some of the new characters, the security folks, Charlotte and Jasper, and then set up the aliens as well. So there was a lot of transitions and introduction of folks in issue 1 that could have been jarring, but I think Dino wrote it smoothly enough that it was kind of just jarring enough, but not too much to take you out of the story. It was able for the reader to hang on for the ride for the whole issue.
Yeah, I think that's important. I like the security guard scene where we see, because it gives you a sense of now there's some order being established here. Because I like that they had uniforms. That piece was Jim talked about progression earlier, and he talked about how in issue 2 we go back and we get to see some the early years. But when you compare that then to this issue, and you get to see a sense of progression from the beginning of the issue straight on through, there's a lot of history being crafted in this world in a short period of time, but also giving me a chance to settle in and get to enjoy them. And seeing her in her costume for the first time, and there's this fight going on, and she's trying to break it up, and seeing that even within these security guards, it looks like we've got some order here, but then all is not well, because even the two of them don't get along, because there's a not necessarily the full respect of the leadership now 2 years later.
Yeah, I really like this little scene between Charlotte, our young sort of idealistic security guard, and Jasper, more senior, not the boss. Wardell is the head security guy, but Jasper is sort of the second in command of the security, and seeing how they clash when trying to deal with this situation, and the dialogue between them, I thought was particularly well done in a very short scene, 2 or 3 pages, completely sets up the relationship between these two that's going to carry through for the rest of the series, and completely sets up who these two characters are without having to do any more than show how they both react to this fight that's spilled out into the street.
Yeah, and you got a really cool look of who they are throughout. Yeah,
I must admit, looking back at this, I haven't read this in a while, and this panel here, the first time you see Jasper with his guns raised and smoking and saying, "Hello, boys," I like how I did that panel. Yeah, I like that kind of upshot on Jasper, just the look on his face.
It's these characters. They look very real. It's like it fits who they are in the story that's being told. Like I know people who are idealistic, law enforcement type of security, like her, and I know guys who are a little bit not completely with the with the rules and kind of will bend the rules, and just the facial kind of expressions he's got going on. I'm sitting there going, "Oh, that's Craig right there." Hey, I've seen that look before on people's faces.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the seeds of where this story goes and ends up after 5 issues are right here on these 2 pages.
Yes,
with these 2 characters.
Oh, definitely. And you gave a great opening and a great, this great intro to who they are, and especially through all the the swerves and the peaks and the valleys that this story goes through. Right here, these couple pages, these are some great stuff to kind of let you know how things are going.
Yeah, I like those 2 pages. Hats off to Dino for the writing there, and I think I carried it off in the art on those 2 pages anyway.
Oh, big time.
Expression when it's aliens, because I'm looking at the next scene, and I really loved the panel choices, how the panels start to get a little bit more organic looking, like, it looks like they're
those
from the
irregular panel borders. That's the first time I had ever done something like that. It was right here. I don't think I had done jagged panel borders like this in Fracture or any of my other things. If I did, I can't remember it. But we really wanted to create a separation, a delineation to show, okay, now we're talking about a different culture, a different civilization. We obviously had to put the dialogue in English, but we noted that it was translated. But we really wanted to create a break, particularly where, as here, because of the space constraints in the issue, and we discussed this, this transition probably could have best been made on a page turn, to have this scene start on the left side page so that you turned the page and saw this transition. But just because of the other stuff we had to cram into issue 1, we couldn't do that. So we had to make this transition over the course of 2 facing pages. So we really wanted to have it look visually different, to give that strong signal to the reader, okay, we're going somewhere different now.
As I'm looking at this page, one of the things I really liked is it's hard when you got creatures that don't have a traditional nose and traditional eyebrows and things like that to show expression. And I really loved how you got to see this speech where, he's trying to rebel, for a lack of a better, and really tell people this is our place and our planet, and we don't need to be sharing this. They shouldn't be here. It's, bring back our culture and all that. Very contemporary topics that are going on right there. You want to show this sense of emotion because he's like, perhaps lost is the wrong word. Our land, our safety, and our identity were given away. You see with the mouth. I love how the mouth explodes open, and you get to see, the sense through the tongue and the teeth placement, and the sense of rallying, rage, whatever, and his fist up in the air. I really appreciated the choices to show expression there. I guess what I'm saying is I love that you created an alien where you didn't go to the eyebrows and nose or something like that to try and show expression. You got creative. I really appreciated the choice because I think so often, and I'm not knocking this because I get why it's done and it's important to convey emotion. I loved that I saw the same emotion without going to those things. I thought it was a choice I really appreciated. I felt it really worked, and I felt it was risky. And I, as a reader, really liked the risk because I felt it kept the aliens feeling very alien and very different.
Well, once I had designed, we had designed the physiology of this head and how it looked, I then kind of realized, okay, now I guess I wasn't thinking when I designed this of how am I going to convey emotion here? Because all they have are these 2 big bulbous eyes, and at least in my head, the eyebrow ridges are sort of rigid, so they can't move them like a human. So all we really had was the mouth. But there is one other subtle thing that you may or may not have perceived, and that is at both ends of this football head, there's a tentacle. The front one containing the mouth and the back one containing what I, in my head, is a reproductive organ. And there are different positions in which they keep those. When those 2 appendages are out and extended, that, in my mind, when I was drawing these, is a symbol of a dominant, aggressive posture. And if you notice in the scene, all the others have their mouths curled under and their top tentacles kind of curled back under. So their heads really just look like a football, and only the person speaking has their 2 tentacles extended off of their head. And I tried to carry that through the rest of the story where the dominant ones would carry their tentacles in that sort of flared out, extended situation, and the subservient ones would carry their tentacles in a more kind of rolled up concealed configuration, and that helped a little bit to convey some level of emotion and some of the kind of hierarchical structure of the alien society. And you could sometimes see character transitions of somebody who kind of took their tentacles out, needing to assert themselves.
Yeah. Honestly, you know what I love about this conversation? I'm learning more, and I think it's one of the things I really do love about science fiction as a genre. I think there's things that you said, you probably missed this piece. I did. So,
well, you might not have consciously taken note of it, but it's just kind of part of the background and the layout that I think might give a little bit more of a richness to when you're looking at these things, and just seeing them happen. You have an innate subconscious understanding of what's going on without technically noting it in the front of your brain.
Isn't that part of dialogue around this, though? I mean, because if you think about it, I grew up being a huge Star Trek and Star Wars fan and all that kind of stuff. My New Hope reference really was an accidental one. But one of the nice things about talking about that, I remember I used to work at a clothing store when I was in college and in late high school. And I sold suits there. And I remember in college, Star Trek Deep Space Nine was on. And Babylon 5, actually, both were running at the same time. So we'd go into work, and there was another fellow sci-fi fan who was at work, and we'd chat about both of those shows. And I can't tell you how many times I would bring up something, or more often, and I probably recognize this more because it was me gaining the knowledge from it, he'd bring up something he noticed in an episode about an alien or about the storyline or the culture of either show that I didn't catch. I think that is the communal aspect of when you gather around these type of stories is you start to become fans and you kind of geek out over the little nuances that you missed that maybe somebody else didn't. It's one of the things I appreciate about doing this show with Jim is that, while Jim and I like a lot of the same material, a lot of times we like it for different reasons, or we're predicting things in a different way because our experience was so different. And I think this is a great series that's an example of how your interests and your view on what you caught on not just the aliens but the humans could be vastly different depending on what your perspective is and who you keyed in on. And that's kind of what's fun about, I think, something where you've got such an interesting character assortment to choose from. Is who you end up following from issue to issue. A lot of times will drive your experience.
Well, that's always the hope when you're creating one of these things, that there's enough there that different people can take different things from it, and it holds everyone's attention and interest, whatever aspect of it that they're seizing on as enjoyable.
Is there anything when you do a series like this that you have to sacrifice? Like when you look back at issue 1, is there something that you wanted to do that you had to sacrifice because of space, because of time? I know that you talk about how you take longer because of the fact that you don't do it full time, but you're putting a lot of time and effort into this, and it's not an unlimited amount of time. There eventually has a point where it has to be done, which is true for any comic creator. There's a point where you have to say, we have to finish here. And were there things that you had to sacrifice as you were doing this? Because I'm admiring the rich details. And it's for me as a fan of yours, and having seen the growth of your work over time, I always admire the increase in tiny details that you put into your work. And it just shows that you're trying to just a little more, and I'm not just talking about on the characters themselves, but in the backgrounds and in the way you may lay out panels and things like that. And I know it's got to be hard for you as an artist. What sacrifices, if any, can you think of that you had to make that maybe were hard for you to do because you just had to?
Well, one of the advantages of working in a creator-owned situation and having the luxury of not having to do this for your day-to-day living is we weren't on a hard schedule. And the way Action Lab works is we were done with like the first 4 issues before it was even solicited for issue 1. So other than maybe the last few pages of issue 5, it wasn't a case where we were rushing to a finish line for time in terms of having to get an issue done and having to make any sacrifices because of time. The sacrifices for me are based on talent and skill, in terms of sometimes I'll read the script and I'll get a vision in my mind of how I would like a page to appear. And when I try to put it down, I reluctantly realize I do not have the skill to do this page as I'm seeing it in my head. Or if I wanted to do this, I would have to stop and take 3 weeks to, refine my ability to do X, Y, or Z to the point where I would be satisfied putting it on a page in a published comic. So sometimes there are compromises you have to make with yourself in terms of, okay, at my skill level, how do I portray this section of the story? Understanding that Adam Hughes or Kevin McGuire or Jim Lee or somebody would be able to do this in a much more spectacular way that I can't approach. So you sometimes have to make compromises to be able to convey this in your own style at your own skill level. That being said, I can't, the double page spread that you guys were complimenting and that I think came out fine, my recollection is I tried numerous other layouts for that, more dynamic layouts, overhead shots, a more sprawling panoramic view even than what you see here. And in the end, I had to satisfy myself with a fairly straight on. I mean, you're looking from the top of an elevated platform down onto the colony there, and it shows everything that needs to be shown in the panel because we had to show kind of the scope of it. Various buildings that come into play later in the series had to be in this shot. But there were several other layouts for this that I kind of attempted and just couldn't make them work. So sometimes you have that type of compromise in your own head, thinking of, if I could have only made it work that other way. And a more skilled artist than I am could have done it.
Are you able to? It's one of the things, every time you say things like that, it's very humble. And I know that it's genuine, and I think it's something that all artists in a creative medium do. I think once you think you're perfect, you need to get out of the industry. And I'm just going to be honest, because I think for me as a reader, one of the things, and when I say reader, me as someone who really enjoys comics for every aspect of it, because I really do feel it's the collection of all of it together that is my enjoyment piece. But I really enjoy being surprised by my favorites. And that is that sense of progression. So when I note that, I don't say that lightly. I really do mean that is something I really enjoy following from a creator. I like seeing that growth because what it shows to me is it matters to you. And emotionally, that connects with me as the reader because I'm like, this is somebody who's really trying to hit it out of the park for me. They care about this. This is they're putting everything into this, which is hard to do because you've got not an unlimited time frame. You're not going to be 90 years old and saying, finally got Blue Hour 1 done. It's just, you could. And, by that time, maybe by then you'll go, and I think I'm finally satisfied. 4 more to go. It just won't work. It just really won't. So at some point, you've got to say to yourself, I feel good about this, even though. How do you find that balance? Because one of the things that I really love about this is I love this. I mean, it was a great read. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your storytelling skills in this. I really felt like you when I say you, I really am complimenting the whole creative team, but obviously you as the artist, I'm looking at your artwork right now and really appreciating the effort that went into this and the care that went into it because it's really apparent on each page. And that's engaging to me because I was drawn into this story and my sense of disbelief was there. That's when the home run happens. Because if I'm not believing your story, I'll read it and enjoy it. That's the difference between an enjoyable comic to me and one that I've loved. Anybody listens to this show, I'm not somebody that bashes comics and things like that because I really appreciate the medium, and I've never picked up a comic, and this is a genuine, honest truth, I've never picked up a comic and gone, this sucks. It's a book that I'll go, that was enjoyable. Is that one that I'm going to go back and reread again and again? No. I appreciate the experience. I'm glad I picked it up. If there's a sequel to it, I probably won't follow it, only because of the fact that it wasn't my cup of tea. But I enjoyed the experience. Something like this, though, where I'm pulled into the world, I care about the characters, and my sense of disbelief is there, that's when I start making references that I don't realize I'm making to other movies and things like that, because I'm captivated by the world. So I appreciate that piece of it. How do you as a creator, though, find that balance of, I'm feeling good about this, even though, do you hit that point? Or is that hard to do for you? Because I really appreciate your drive and work ethic, but also, you know, your constant struggle to, I want to get better. I want to get better. And I feel it on the pages. Do you ever hit that point where you feel by the time issue 1's done, you're like, I feel good about this? You know, it's because it's great to me.
I find that when I'm drawing something, unless I've done something which is an error or something to frustrate myself, usually I can look at a page after I've completed and say, okay, that's pretty good. I'm ready to go on to the next one. It's only after the passage of time when you, and as I mentioned before, there's like frustration of the tedium of, oh God, that took me a long time. I don't even want to look at that anymore. But in terms of the quality of it, it's usually the case that your sensibilities of what you can view with your eye and appreciate evolve along with your talents of your hand. So normally when I've completed a page, I usually am like, yeah, that's pretty good. I'm okay with that. It's only after 6 months and I've gotten better and I look back at it and say, oh, okay, that's not as good as what I'm doing now, so I don't like it. So it's not that you leave every page with this sense of regret of how sad you are that you didn't reach your potential. Usually if you're pushing yourself, I usually find I feel pretty good when I complete a single page and move on to the next page and finish a book and things. Like I'm feeling that way now on the book I'm working on now. Like I'm look at these and okay, this is the best stuff I've ever done. So normally if you're continuing to progress, every time you do something, you feel like, wow, that's the best stuff I've ever done. So it's only over the passage of time that you look at it with sort of regret that, that wasn't that great. So it's not this angst-ridden thing, page to page, where you're just fighting this inner battle to take your pen up off it to say, no, I could make it better. That's not how I operate anyway. I usually feel pretty decent when I'm finishing page to page.
And you should.
My struggle is simply that my art style, there's a lot of artists or some artists that have an art style that is a more sketchy or rough style. Not to say somebody's trying to take a shortcut or not doing a good job, but simply because of the style of art they've chosen, it lends itself to a quicker, more abbreviated stroke or a quicker production method in terms of how they create their characters. Unfortunately for me, my art style involves a pretty precise line. By the very nature of my style, I have to take a decent amount of time on each page because I have a very line-heavy, line-focused, line-predominant art style. So almost all the lines that I put down on the page have to be put down precisely. That just lends itself to taking a long time.
Does that... It's interesting because not being an artist myself, this is one of the things I always love about having these type of conversations because I admire, there's perspective in this where you've got characters that are larger and smaller versions of themselves on different portions of different pages and you see them from different angles. You always know it's those characters. They always, from panel to panel, you're not like, oh my gosh, this character looks so drastically different over here. I get that it's them because they have a hat on or that guy's bald, or they happen to have a snoot because they're an alien. The distinguishing features are all there. You know who these characters are from any angle, no matter where you see them. You're not like, oh, this is some new character now. Oh, wait, that's supposed to be that guy. That stuff I really appreciate about your art is the fact that no matter what size they are, no matter what perspective or angle I'm seeing them from, I know that these are these characters. For me, I've dabbled in drawing. I enjoy it. I enjoy doodling. I enjoy sketching. I have never put in the kind of work ethic that you have. I mean, 2 to 3 hours a night, and I'm sure over the vast amount of years, there's been a lot more hours put in than that. You're talking about just as far as trying to put together a comic issue. Because I follow you on Facebook. I know when you're doing your sketch runs and things like that over there. And I really I enjoy that. I'm glad you share that because as a friend and as a fan, I really enjoy following that because it's added enjoy. It's like you're like building living DVD extras for me, which that stuff's fun, and I quite enjoy it. I really appreciate the perspective piece, though. How do you get good at that? Because that's the part that frustrated me.
Two things you just mentioned are, for me personally, two of the biggest challenges in trying to put together a comic book. One is backgrounds and perspective that are challenging to me. And I made a concerted, conscious effort in Blue Hour to try to up my game on that. And there are tools that I use in drawing programs that can help with perspective to make things a lot easier than people who came before digital drawing methods had. For example, once again, referring to this double-page spread showing the colony in issue 1. If you see how the buildings are laid out, that's a classic example of perspective. And if I didn't have the digital drawing tool that I use that helped me lay out those lines in perspective, that would have taken hours and hours with a ruler and a drafting board. And I mean, there are ways to do this on a ruler and a drafting table that many, many artists for many, many years have done. But I was able to do this much more quickly because of a computer drawing, snap the lines to a perspective grid that really helped. And on all the exterior, interior scenes, those tools were helpful to me in getting the perspective at least visually credible, not correct. Because sometimes you can just eyeball it, and for purposes of a single panel where you're only seeing the corner of a building, the perspective doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be visually credible enough to sell the panel. So you have to know where you have to tediously make the perspective absolutely correct, like on this double-page spread. If this perspective wasn't correct, this whole scene of the colony viewed from above would not have sold this page. But like on the next page, when Jasper's standing there and you see the edge of a building behind him, that just has to be credible enough to not distract you from looking at Jasper. It's a talent that you have to cultivate, and you just have to kind of draw buildings a zillion times and draw cars. And I've heard interviews with Mike Norton about some of the tools he uses, and there's a program I think Mike uses to do cars and stuff in backgrounds, and he said, I ain't never drawn a car again because I hate it. That's kind of the tedium you have to overcome. The other challenge for me that I have worked very, very hard to overcome and still find myself having some issues with is what you just mentioned in making the characters repeatably recognizable. It's one thing to develop your skill as an artist to the point where you can draw a face that looks like a human face. When you see all these art books, they draw a sphere, put a line for the center line, and the eyes are one eye width apart, and the mouth is, but the corners of the mouth are directly into the eyes, and the nose is on the center line, and the ears are on the vertical center line, and the hairline is here. There's a mathematical layout to how a face looks, and you can train yourself to draw a face that looks like a face, but drawing the same face over and over again so that it's recognizable as the same character is an immensely harder thing to try to develop the skill to do. Hairstyles and face shapes and glasses and all sorts of tricks you try to use to show the reader what character is which, making one character bald and one character have hair and one character have red hair and one character be blonde. Those are all little cues, and you mentioned putting a hat on somebody. All of those things are part of your arsenal to make sure the characters are recognizable so that the story can flow. And I think I've gotten better at that. I'm still not where I want to be in terms of I've noticed in looking back at the totality of Blue Hour, this redheaded character, the young woman.
Miss Reardon.
this Reardon, at some points, I strayed a little bit from her model. If you look at her in issue 1 and you look at her in issue 5, obviously she has red hair, and you can tell it's the same character, but I strayed a little bit on her facial features and how her hairstyle appeared. It's probably not something that jumped out at you that you noticed, because it's a slow evolution that, again, because I'm taking a year and a half to draw these, if I'm drawing 5 issues in 6 months, it's harder for my perceptions of these characters or my depictions of them to drift. But when I'm doing it over a year and a half, sometimes it drifts a little bit. So that's a big challenge for me. So it's gratifying for me to hear that you found the characters coherent and recognizable and repeatable over the course of the issue.
And not only did I find them recognizable and coherent throughout this, I actually liked some of the choices you made on the actual design of the characters. We've got a couple who have some flaws to them. They're not just the picture perfect, superhero body types that are always out there. We have some real people, in this book. And I like that when I see that kind of stuff in an actual book. So that's something that, again, I'm going to give you a compliment on, just on, making them real.
Well, yeah, the two main characters here both are very flawed characters. One's kind of a broken down, seen better days, and one, he's got a little bit of pot belly, balding guy. But that's very intentionally done to try to show, these are 20 years ago Marines who have had a lot of life since then. I
like that, actually, because a lot of times in comics, there's always the joke about everybody being jacked up. You know what I mean? I like that these look like real people. I mean, you definitely had pretty people. Like, I mean, his wife, you can definitely clearly see this is a very pretty woman. And, you can see why Reardon is a cute girl, those type of things. But I liked that, with the guys, you had this sense of, well, they had their prime.
Yeah, and it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I liked that because there was a sense of reality to them. That's something that's very much TV and film and things like that too. When I think some of your better shows give you a mix of,
the other fun character to draw and design was she only shows up. She's a peripheral character, but she keeps showing up in different scenes. It's this older woman who runs the bar. We designed her with a face that could stop a truck, but she's hilarious and fun to draw, and she's the one character who a lot of the other characters give some deference to because she kind of runs the bar and is one of the unofficial leaders of the community. But she was very fun to design and draw. She's recognizable because I gave her, Pinocchio nose. It's not all hyper realistic. Her nose wouldn't exist in real life.
Well, and maybe gravity on the planet. Look what 2 years will do to you. When I was at home, I was a model. This series is something that I've greatly enjoyed. I've read. I want to be careful what I say because I don't want to say too much because I really do want to tease this because I want people to read it. Yeah. But as I got to read it through, you get to know these characters. And as Jim mentioned, you get to see flashbacks to earlier years and understand characters' backgrounds and histories. The drama and the intrigue of the politics and the interpersonal relationships from both the humans and the aliens, not independent of each other, and in interacting with each other, become readily apparent throughout the series. I really enjoyed that about this. I found this to be very gripping. It was a very tight series and a lot of fun for me to read. So I was glad when you and I had the opportunity, we ran into each other at our yearly trek over at Wizard World Comic-Con. I really enjoy talking to you about your work because of the fact that I really do enjoy the progression, and that comes from a love for what you do. And I think my favorite comics, that jumps off the page. I really appreciate you and the whole creative team sharing that with us. Did we miss anything about Blue Hour that you think we should touch on? Should we talk about? Actually, we should probably talk about what the Blue Hour is, because Blue Hour is a big catalyst of all of this.
Yeah, and I'll take a little credit. The title and the notion of the Blue Hour was actually my idea. In talking to Dino, he had the story set up, and all the major plot lines were there, and he had known that this planet had two suns. But for some reason, when I envisioned one of the suns as being a yellow sun or a red sun, and one of the suns being a blue sun. I don't think that's scientifically possible, but it's a science fiction story, and we can do what we want. And so just this notion occurred to me of if there were two suns, one being red or yellow and brighter, and the blue one being kind of dimmer, what would happen? Because there would be a time during each day when one of the suns would set, and there would be a certain time of day when only the other sun was illuminating the planet. And it just occurred to me, what would happen if the blue sun was the one that stayed up a little bit longer, and there was a short period of time every day when the planet that was normally bathed in this bright yellow light from the more bright yellow sun was suddenly plunged into this eerie blue light emitted by the blue sun. And again, I don't think that would ever actually happen if there were two suns like that. But in our world, we can suspend disbelief and posit that would occur. So I was just like, there was scenes in this that bad stuff happened, and in talking to Dino, I was just like, what if kind of there was this local thing that happened on the planet where you get this time of day when there was only the blue sun up, and that was the time when everybody was sort of superstitious about bad stuff happening, because the lighting would be very different, and a planet like this where it had a thin atmosphere to begin with would just look visually completely different during that time period. And what if there was kind of a local superstition about that, and we could have that be when all the bad stuff happens, or some of the bad stuff happens. And from that evolved the title of The Blue Hour, because then we're like, because Dino liked that. He said, yeah, I like that. Let's incorporate that. And he started incorporating it into the script. What the locals would call it would be The Blue Hour. And so that's where the title ended up coming from. So there was a little bit of collaboration on the story. That was my big contribution to the storyline. The rest of everything was directly from Dino's original script. But it was a fun title, a fun visual thing that we could play with, and that's another place where the colorists, through the course of the story, did a chunk of the work in terms of some of the scenes being differently colored because they were taking place in the blue hour.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about the whole blue hour thing too is that you mentioned that it's a superstition. It was a superstition that people who are looking for opportunity, and when I say people, I mean I'm talking about aliens as well, would not be afraid to use to their own ends and their own means. And I really loved that sense of intrigue too, where this superstition becomes a centerpiece to beginning turmoil. Because we're seeing what looks like, for quite a bit of it, the sense of this culture developing. Even though it's uneasy, you get a sense of this culture developing. As you well know, if you give somebody a snow globe, they're going to want to shake it.
Sure.
And I love how this snow globe gets shaken up.
And obviously the blue hour over time will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people kind of believe and are frightened of this time of day, that's naturally when, if you're going to prey on somebody or do something bad, that's when you're going to do it.
Is there anything, guys, Jim, I know I sometimes get diarrhea of the mouth when we do these episodes. Is there anything that you wanted to ask that I missed?
Well, one quick point I got to make that I absolutely on the last two pages, because again, each of these issues had some great endings where it just keeps you going for the next one, and of course with that great last page, you see, in the middle of the blue hour, our main character sitting there and he's got a guy with a gun. But the thing I loved about that was if you go one page earlier, and you see him looking, and he's talking about the wicked schemes and foul plans. You look at the very bottom corner of that one building, you start seeing the outline of the person who has the gun. And I thought that for me was a really cool art choice to put that little bit right down there at the bottom. Again, completely missed it until I did my art.
You wouldn't notice that unless you look back at that page after seeing the last page.
Yeah, that was awesome. I like that you did that, man.
Well, the trick was to make it just subtle enough that it wasn't noticeable, but obvious enough that you saw it when you were looking for it. So I'm glad you saw it. I mean, it really is just a bump of a shadow. But if you knew where to look for it or intentionally looked there, you saw it.
Yeah, that was a cool choice.
Thank you.
Chad, one of the things that I wanted to talk about again is the fact that this is going to be very soon a collected edition. It's available in a lot of places. You can still get single issues. You can go ahead and pick it up on Comixology, but then the inevitable trade is coming out. And one of the things I like about Action Lab is very aggressive about getting trades out and collected editions. So it's nice that there's a wide variety of ways to pick up Action Lab materials. I really like when there's a storyline that I enjoy having the trade collection, having them all bound together, especially when it's, a mini-series arc like this. It's nice to be able to page through them and read the storyline the way that it's meant to be read. So that's coming out in mid-May?
It's coming out in mid-May, and you should still be able to order it through Diamond. The pre-ordering might be over, but Action Lab's books are such that I think you can continue to order them even after the pre-order date. So check at your local comic shop. You should be able to get it, and you might be able to just walk in and pick it up off the shelf here in a few weeks.
And I do know our show sponsor...
But we're pretty excited about it.
Our show sponsor, DCBService.com, I find that I, after the fact, forget to order things. And they're real good when I email them about adding things onto my order. Especially because I'll hear them on podcasts and things like that, where I'm like, hey, this is a book I really want to get. It's a great way to jump on board that. Can I shout out an Action Lab Kickstarter?
Sure.
Athena Voltaire, the ongoing series. I'm a huge fan of Steve Bryant, so I'm going to get a little geeky.
Well, we Action Lab owes a debt to Steve Bryant, a kind of a birth debt, because the first book Action Lab ever put out in the direct market in Diamond was the first issue of my book, Fracture. That'll be my claim to fame for Action Lab forever. Action Lab is going to do bigger and better things than anything that I produce, hopefully going on in the future. But I can always say I am the artist on the first book Action Lab ever had in the Diamond catalog, and we did a Kickstarter for that. And that was in 2010, 2010, I think, before Kickstarter was the thing that everybody did. At that time, the only person we had ever heard of who had done a Kickstarter was Steve Bryant. He did a Kickstarter long ago for one of the original versions of Athena Voltaire. Mm-hmm. And it was like, wow, there's this new thing, Kickstarter. So we used it, and we had one of the earliest Kickstarters for Fracture, which was, at the time, we thought the second one for a comic book that anybody had ever done. That's probably wrong, but that's what we felt at the time. So Steve Bryant was who we blatantly copied for our Kickstarter for Fracture way back in 2010.
So to keep up with what's going on over at Action Lab, we're going to obviously go to Action Lab's website. Where else would you like them to go? Because I'll have all these in the show notes, but is there anywhere else that you would like to point them to?
Well, all of Action Lab's books are also available on Comixology. You can get them immediately, downloaded through that. So you could go to Comixology and just click on there's an Action Lab publisher section there, actionlabcomics.com, and just the Diamond Previews catalog in our Action Lab section that shows all the newest stuff coming out. And you should follow Action Lab on Facebook and Twitter, too. We have some folks who are very diligent about tweeting out and Facebooking out all the new stuff that's coming out, and when to order stuff and what to order, and follow Action Lab hashtag. We tweet out all the Danger Zone and Action Lab stuff, and follow me on Facebook, too. You can see stuff about the project I'm currently working on.
And I'm... As you noticed, I was being very tactful about saying anything about that. Let's do it this way. You are working on another project. What can you share? Let me put it on you that way.
Yeah, I can share the general plot synopsis. It's again, after working on Blue Hour for 2+ years to do 5 issues, I wanted to turn again to something different. I didn't want to do another sci-fi series. I wasn't ready to turn back to doing another superhero series. So I also, for the first time, wanted to do something that I wrote myself. I have always worked with writers, and I've been, I think, fortunate to work with some very good writers and people who I like. But I wanted to do something that was completely my vision and my own, that the only person I had to answer to was me. So I had an idea kicking around for probably as long or longer than I've been involved with Action Lab. And it's a kind of a fairy tale story, and it's called The Null Fairies. And it's about a fairy who is a gatherer of the raw materials to create pixie dust, which is the catalyst and currency in the whole magical world in my fairy world in my story. And she suffers a grievous injury in a battle with some evil forces who are trying to get the fairy dust for themselves, and she loses her connection to the magical world and becomes the only mortal fairy. All the fairies in my world are immortal, but this one has her magic stripped from her due to an injury, and she has to kind of develop her mind and her intelligence to continue to play a role in the fairy world. And she becomes this sort of consultant to the queen to solve supernatural problems in the fairy world, even though she has no magic. So I'm drawing a lot of fairies and a lot of wings and a lot of organic, natural stuff, more than I've drawn during a sci-fi book or a fairy or a superhero book. I'm drawing woodland creatures and squirrels and frogs and falcons, and there's one of the characters of the book rides a falcon, and snakes and bats and things. So it's a different challenge for myself, drawing forests and trees and streams and stuff. A lot of this book takes place in the deep forest, and drawing these little fairy citadels and meetings taking place under mushrooms and all that sort of thing. And it's a surprisingly adult and violent book. This is definitely a grown-up fairy tale where the fairies in my world are warriors fighting the forces of dark magic.
So one of the things, I'm not going to spoil anything, you were kind enough to show me some preview pages of it. I just want to say that this is something that people are going to want to keep an eye out for, so definitely follow Chad, because I loved the sense of lore. And I'll leave it at that. I loved the characters, I loved the atmosphere, I loved the sense of lore. And these are characters that I want to follow. It's a story that I want to follow, and I see so much potential in it that it's just another project of yours. And I'm going to honestly give you probably the most sincere compliment I can give you as a creator. I find when your name is attached to a project now that it has nothing to do with the fact that I know you or that I consider you a friend, because those are all genuine and true. I have found that your projects are all interesting, unique, and things that I want to follow. And I found that that's a very consistent thing. When we talked about,
that's gratifying to hear, and thank you.
And I mean, it's genuine truth. When you talked about when you and I talked about having you finally back on the show again to talk about Blue Hour, I remembered last time we had a conversation. We were talking about Fracture, about the genesis of this. It was just getting started. And I remember you telling me a bit about the premise of it and being excited then. And then seeing this pay off and really enjoying it in its fruition and just seeing it be everything you said it was going to be and so much more. I'm so excited for this project for you because I felt that way sitting with you. We had dinner together and you showed me some pages of it, and I felt like I really was intensely excited for this world to come to life.
Well, the good news is I am further along on the Null Fairies now than I was on Blue Hour the last time we talked about Blue Hour on your show. I'm almost the Null Fairies. The Null Fairies has the possibility of being an ongoing story. I think more than Blue Hour. Blue Hour was always intended to be a beginning, middle, and end. Dino had a particular story to tell, and there's. I don't know that he has any. I don't think he has any intent to continue Blue Hour beyond this 5-issue series. I have set up the Null Fairies such that it could continue. I mean, certainly my first 5 issue story arc as a beginning, middle, and end, and I think and hope is a very compelling story. But I am doing the pencils on issue 3 right now. Issues 1 and 2 are completely penciled and inked. Nothing has been colored yet, but I have, for purposes of my work, issues 1 and 2 of the Null Fairies are in the can. I'm penciling issue 3 right now. So it will probably be another year before the Null Fairies hits the stand in whatever form it's going to be. It may be single issues. It may be a book that is really simply as an initial hardcover or trade without doing single issues at all. That hasn't been determined yet, but I'm almost halfway done with the series right now, so I'm pretty excited about it.
Well, please plan to come back and chat with us about it, because I'm going to be very excited to really talk about this in depth. I already am. It's one of those things when you've been lucky enough to kind of start taking a look at what you're doing and the genesis of this that I want to say more. And I'm deliberately not, because I really want to save that for the opportunity when we can get really spoilery about the intro to this. I'd like to do the same thing with that. I'd like to kind of tease what's so great about it when it comes close to coming out. So please plan to come back if you'd give us some time again. And
I would love to. And anybody who, if this has piqued anybody's interest, just follow me on Facebook or Twitter, and it's just my name, Chad Cicconi, in either place. I do sneak out some sketches. I think just last night, or 2 nights ago, I put out a panel from issue 3 of the Null Fairies, just to kind of give a little weekly sneak peek and hopefully pique everybody's interest and keep everybody in the back of their minds watching for this series when it does come out. So if you're interested, just hook me up on Facebook. I'll friend you, and you can see some preview art as I try to release at least one little snippet of something, just a character sketch or a single panel of something, at least once or twice a week.
That's great. And so, Chad, as always, thank you again for coming on the show. I can't wait to have you back on again, because I want to talk Null Fairies now, too. And really, thank you for Blue Hour. I really have been greatly anticipating it, and it's been a thrill ride for me. So,
well, it was a fun book to work on. And again, I got to tip my hat to Dino, the writer. The most of the innovation of the story was his, and it was a pleasure working with him. And I'm excited to get the trade in my hands here shortly.
Sounds great.
And thanks for having me.
Hope this craft can withstand this powerful force.
How you doing, Johnny? This is Rob Sewell. Just wanted to call you up on long hiatus because we get due for whatever reason, but that's all here and there. Just wanted to comment on the price increase of DC Comics. Now, I have no problem with it per se, but if a book is selling not as well as a $2.99 book when it was not $2.99 in the first place, what makes the company think that that book is actually going to make it by raising the price by $1? The best thing to do is just to keep the book at what it is and do a little bit of promotion and see if we can upgrade the readership. But I'm not going to dwell on that for a long time. I'm going to get the books when they go up $3.99 regardless, because right now with the DC Universe, I'm enjoying this universe as much as I've ever have in my whole 40 years of reading. Also would like to comment on what you two gentlemen think about annuals. Now, the recent Batman and Action Comics annuals were awesome, great comic book concepts because they separated the books from the regular storyline so you can just get a great story without having to worry about if you're picking up the regular titles. You know, a lot of people go in a store and they'll see a number 1 on a book, see annual, and they might pick it up. And they don't be lost when they pick it up because they got a nice contained story within those annuals. And I would like to comment on DC's Swamp Thing and Superman team up in the annual. For some reason, when those two characters get together, it is always magical. Whether you go back to the Alan Moore stories with Swamp Thing or whatever he's ever had with Swamp Thing, the books are always magical. Great pair of two odd characters that really shouldn't even fit together, but the stories just are always wonderful together. I also would like to comment on Batman's annual. that came out recently. Oh, man, I love Ace the Bat Hound. I wish Batman would utilize the dog more in his stories because I haven't had a lot of experience with the Ace Hound, but the couple of stories that I've ran into with this dog, I actually enjoyed them. So I wish they would put him more into the books because I like to see how him and Batman will interact more in the Batman universe. Also, I would like to comment on the Superman books at this time. At this point in time in DC's history, these are some of the best written Superman books I've ever seen. I've been reading Superman since Action Comics 542. That's when I started picking it up. But that's been a while ago in the 80s. Because back at that point in time, I didn't want to pick up a book unless it was a number one, which if you think about it now, it's kind of pretty dumb. I mean, you're not going to get all the issues of Action Comics. So to miss out on a great book because it's got a high number was straight ludicrous on my part. But, easy come, easy go. I would like to also comment on the DC Universal television things, where they're going right now. We're really in for a great time with the new Krypton movies, shows coming up, and then we got Powers, which started also. But actually, after around the 6th episode, I'm really starting to enjoy the show. It's starting to get funny. I think this show should be okay. I don't know if it's going to make it, but I'm going to support it and watch because I'm really enjoying the shows from DC all over, even the Marvel shows. I wish Powers would have stayed on television, on the PlayStation, but, hopefully it can come back one day because it was a good show, a different take on the superhero genre, which we need. We don't need the same stuff over and over again, so we need stuff like that to make it. I also would like to comment on the Suicide Squad book. If people are not picking this book up, it's pretty one of the best runs we've ever had. I read the original John Austin run, which was pretty awesome. Have all the issues of it, a good run. But this run is pretty good too, and I suggest people go out and pick it up. Also, would like to comment on DC's new Batman book, Metal. Was not going to pick up this book, but after seeing all of the news on News Around Me in the past from Scott Snyder, I'm going to have to add another book to the pull list because this thing looks pretty good. And with the other 5 books that they announced, a new take on the challenges of the unknown. We got a book about Sean, which you'll be really enamored with. Myth Metal, which empowers 5 individuals called the Immortal Men. That's going to be pretty good. Probably won't pick those books up singly. We'll probably get those books in trade because they'll probably read better for me in a trade. Since you two gentlemen have turned me on to getting trades, I'm constantly looking for deals and things on these trades, and I'm really starting to become really fond of the trade format, especially when I take books to work. So it really helps without having the single issues to actually get ruined or something destroyed or get oil on because I work at a very dusty spot. Gentlemen, I also would like to comment on Wonder Woman. Heard we'll be getting a new writer, and I hope this new writer can take the book to where Rucker took the book. But I'm going to give the guy a chance, and I'm going to still be reading the book and enjoying it. So, and at your 2 suggestions, I wasn't going to pick up Super Sons, but I went to the local shop. I saw the first 2 issues on the shelf, and I picked them up, and boy, I'm glad I did. Oh man, the books are good. The books, Super Sons, are really good. I'm in for the long run. Hopefully, this book have a long life. Hopefully, Dad give this book to the young children to read. I'm gonna give it to my 10-year-old son to read when he comes and visit me for the summer. That'll be something me and him can relate to together because it's a pretty nice book, not too violent, it's funny, and it's something he can read. So I'll be sharing that book with him. You gentlemen have a pleasant day, and as I always say, until the Blue Bullet tier becomes a major member of the Justice League of America, make mine Raging Bullet and keep on raging. You guys have a pleasant day.
Let's talk first about price point, because he's making a good point about price point. We're obviously very similar to Russell in the sense that we still buy our comics. The price point, I buy them online, I buy them through DCB service, or I'll buy them digitally. Price point, though, does hit me in the sense that it will affect, disposable income. When I take a look at my monthly, I do try to stay in the same price range. When I'm doing my monthly purchases. So you know what it'll affect more? It will affect things like trades and hardcovers and things like that I'm purchasing that are extra. If my weekly comics are the ones that are, because I like the weekly fix. That tends to be my first priority. So it tends to affect collected editions or statues or, other add-ons that I will add to my collection. How does it affect you? Because it doesn't irritate me or anything. I get more worried. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead where you're going to go with that, and I'll follow up further.
Yeah, well, with it doesn't. Well, I can't say it doesn't affect me because I am looking at things a little bit differently as to what I'm purchasing. Because you think about, there's some titles that I am getting my physical copies, I'm getting the digital copies, and then I'm getting a collected, deluxe edition trade. And there's some books that I enjoy reading and I want to keep getting them, but I know, if we talk about it, I'm going to get a digital version and the paper version of it.
Right.
So looking at when we start getting into some of these price points, there's probably going to be a couple titles that I may shift over to purely digital just because I'm I still want to read them because they're still good, but I don't want to have to double buy them. Some titles that I'm still going to get double, like, the Superman titles, the Bat titles, I'm getting, those, and I'm going to look at, what bundles DCBS offers, and there may be a bundle that I look at and I say, that's going to become my digital bundle. Those titles I'm going to get digitally. Just because when we talk about it on the show, I don't have to rebuy them I won't have to rebuy them a second time. I'm just buying them the one time.
So your thinking is, even though the paper is technically cheaper, because of the fact that you're double buying them, you'd rather just have them whatever your first purchase is going to be.
Yeah, that's certain, because I'm not 100% sure that's the way I'm going to go with this. I'm going to actually look at, once we get into the new price points, once we get into everything is set, what's the price of the comic's going to be, I'm going to look at, how much I'm spending now compared to how much I didn't, how much I spent before. And there may be some changes as some stuff may go pure digital, just because, so I'm not doing that double buying for the show.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because it's almost, the digital medium is an interesting one for me because you and I are both similarly. I like buying them digitally. I like having the paper. We're wired the same way on that end. But I don't double buy everything. When I do, I'll tend to go either digital or paper. But I really like certain collected editions. I like omnibuses. I love absolute editions, where you get a chance to see the art bigger. I tend to get all the absolute editions. It does affect, in my case, any other additional comics that I'll pick up, which just because of the fact that I tend to stockpile a lot anyway, just because I don't have time to read as much as I'd really like to. And so it does shrink down my stockpile because I don't buy as many extras as before. Like you would talk about trades and hardcovers. I won't buy trades and hardcovers of favorite storylines unless it's in an absolute or an omnibus if my bill's too high. It tends to be, I like to collect those unique formats, especially like I'm collecting these Golden Age omnibuses. I really like them because it's a lot of material that I haven't read. I happen to just really like that era. So I'll get those because I feel like I'm getting new material versus getting material that I already have. So that tends to be my priority. I want to expand my collection versus double or triple buy it because of the cost. I get worried, though, going back to something Russell was saying, for you and I, we're still going to buy, if it's a favorite title, we're still going to buy it. So we're the fans that have already bought it. They've already got us. We're already hooked. I get worried about a casual crowd. We don't have a big casual crowd in comics right now, and that tends to worry me more than anything else. There isn't like this big push. There was that time when comics were like really cool. Not that they're not cool now, but I mean, the Vertigo, like I'm thinking of things like the Vertigo era where like people were picking up all of a sudden hardcovers and trades of Vertigo that maybe didn't read comics before because Vertigo was cool, things like Sandman and stuff like that. There's not that like really cool draw right now for a casual crowd to pick up comics that there was before. I think the TV shows and things kind of help make the properties cool, but I still don't hear a lot of a casual crowd. They're starting to get into price points now where the price point's prohibitive for people to jump on. So that's the piece, and I think Russell was alluding to that, and I agree with him in that end. I get worried about these titles that aren't getting the readership. Now, all of a sudden, we're putting them at a price point that it's hard to get a new readership for. Because there's some unique titles. He was throwing out, like, and I've been jumping around a little bit on some of the things he's talking about, like that Nth Metal series and the Challengers of the Unknown, stuff like that. I love the experimentation in comics. The problem is a lot of those books that are experimental sometimes take a while to get some traction. And they take a lot of buzz and word of mouth and things like that to get going. But they wind up being sometimes some of my favorite monthly reads because there's something different than what I'm currently reading right now. And I love that. And I like when they take risks and take characters that maybe you don't normally think of as having a monthly title, or maybe properties like Challengers of the Unknown that haven't had a monthly in a while. And they're giving them, brushing them off, dusting them off, giving them a new life. I love stuff that's going on with Young Animals right now. I like what's really going on with Warren Ellis and the whole, Wildstorm thing that they're doing. It's experimental. It's trying to make things relevant to today with properties. Some of them work great, some of them don't, but that's part of the fun of an experiment, right? Price point does drive a lot of that, though, in readership and things. So that's a part for me that I get worried when I look at numbers now that I just want comics as a medium. I'm waiting for that time, and I hope it comes soon, where there's some buzz breakout thing that brings people back to comics. I don't care if it's DC property. I don't care if it's Marvel. I don't care if it's a cool indie book or something, like from Image, or because Image, I'm not saying that Image isn't. Image is sort of independent now, but it's a big name. I think there's different categories now. I think before it was like the big two and the indies. Now I think that there's the big two, and then there's a second tier, then there's indies over there, which is great. I mean, I want all this stuff to be successful. To me, I'm looking for that breakout. I hope there's that breakout thing, and price point is going to be that thing that's going to make it very hard for people to jump onto this hobby, because there's a lot of competition out there in media, both physically in paper and digitally, that for those impulse purchasers to purchase, it's very competitive now. You can buy, nowadays you can go on some video game sales and buy video games for the price of a comic book. It becomes very hard when you've got that crowd that I think is tailor-made to read comics, to tell them you can have one issue of this, or you can have a full-blown video game on a game sale. I mean, it makes a powerful argument. And that's not me they got me hooked. I'm hook, line, and sinker. I want that new crowd. It's hard, I think, to generate that new crowd nowadays. So that's my only worry about price point. That extra dollar does mean something.
It will affect things. And hopefully not to the point that it hurt, because you think back to when they did the price increase, before, where they started really seeing it affect the bottom line. So they said, hey, and they did that whole big thing where they dropped the price back down. And it's, the laws of supply and demand. It's, price, is going to determine, that's on the one axis, demand's on the other. And you got to find that sweet spot where, right where, the price and sales, intersect. It's the basic, business law. And once you find that sweet spot, you got to stick with it. And I don't know if the new price point is going to be in there, or if they currently were at the sweet spot. I think this is going to be something we got to keep an eye on.
I still go back to, I don't think price by itself is still an issue. I think it's how do you reach that new crowd and make them have some buy-in? What is the avenue for it now? Is it for them? Is it a monthly delivery? Because you kind of want to build a community around them now, right? If you get new readers, so you want to build some form of community around a new casual crowd. But how do you do that and make them feel part of the culture? And get excited about the collectability aspect of comics and the ongoing stories and buy into the characters when they haven't been exposed to it before, or maybe haven't been in a long time. It is cost prohibitive. You really, it can't be just lapsed readers. I think we often look for lapsed readers in comics. It's how do you reach out to that new crowd and get them? And I'm looking for that magic. I don't have an answer. I wish I did. If I did, I would be glad to share and bottle it. I'm excited for somebody to discover that answer, because there's so much talent in comics, and the stories they're delivering now are something you can't get anywhere else. Comics don't have, they have a budget, as far as to create them, but they also have an open landscape to be able to do things you can't get away with in film and television.
And it's interesting because I got a couple of people at work that I talk comics with. Now, they don't read comics, but they like the comic properties, and whether it's the movies, the TV shows, or, like stuff like Preacher, and it's where it's it's its own little kind of it's the stuff inspired by the comics, and they like those. And I talk to them about the actual original source material because none of them have ever because I'm like, hey, you want to borrow? Because the one I have long talks with Walking Dead on, I'm like, you want to borrow my Walking Dead? You can read the original. No, I'm okay with this. Or the guy that I talk Star Wars with, I've been telling him how there's a lot of really cool Star Wars stuff out now. He's like, nah, I'm okay with just watching the movies. It's you get that kind of where it's I don't know. And these are people that I think would enjoy it, but they, for whatever reason, this is their form. Their medium of choice is television and movies. It's not the actual book. So it's, I don't know, how we pull people for like that who are interested in the medium or interested in the subject material, but aren't getting this exact medium, aren't getting the comic book medium.
I don't think it's like creating that crazy jumping on point because, like, okay, we did the reboot, the New 52, right? I think that generated some buzz, but who really was the buzz for that? That was really, I think, the comic crowd again, Yeah. And I think they were also the ones that were the most critical about it. Some people really loved it, some people fell in the middle, and some people jumped off because of it, because they weren't seeing the characters or linked to, which is where Rebirth came in, right? And we're enjoying that right now because of the fact that it slowly morphed this universe back to some of the basic tenets of what we've enjoyed. So I don't think that's really what you need to get people into comics. It's really, getting exposure. And I do think price point's an issue. Digital, I think, is an avenue to it. Believe me, I'm the last person in the world. I love paper comics. I love comic shops. When I go on a vacation, if I end up, I know we do ads for DCBService.com, and in many ways they are my local. I've met Cameron and the crew there at many a convention. They always have booths set up. So they are, in they're their own brick and mortar. I'm a fan of comic shops, whether they're online or they're brick and mortar stores that, are local, whatever. I want them to be viable because, it's a tchotchke medium. I like having, the stuff. That's where the statues come from, the action figures. That's the place you go into and you browse and see those things in person and pick them up. And every time I go to a comic shop, I walk out with something. I don't go to my local every week now because of the fact that we do our shopping from our show sponsor, but I do go to my local often. We got a couple of them nearby over on the east side. I know you've got a local shop by you. And when I do go in, I always walk out with something. And it's, whether it's an action figure or, a trade or a hardcover or some book that I'm not currently reading, just, something that catches my eye on the shelf. I like to support the locals. I want those to be around. Where I'm going with this, though, is that's not necessarily the avenue for a new crowd. I think there is a crowd for that. I think there's a new collector's crowd that you can bring in. We had the whole speculator market and thing like that for years. Good, bad, or indifferent, whatever you feel about that. I think you can generate a crowd like that again. But I do think there's also a digital opportunity. And I think the digital price point, trying to preserve the brick and mortar shop with the digital price point, I think they're two different mediums. I don't think your paper collectors, like you and I are collectors. You could make the digital price point 99 cents. I'm still buying paper. I still want those books. So it's, you're not going to chase me out of buying paper comics because of the fact that you make the price point so low. There's a collectability of that. There's a tangible feel of that. There really need to be two separate markets. I think the catch is, though, current comic marketing and why it always comes up as a threat to your comic shops. Digital and the current comic shop market are really pitted against each other because they're aiming for the same crowd. They're aiming for us. So it does threaten them because of that. You need to make a newsstand. I don't know what the answer is for that. You and I grew up with newsstands. And whether you never walked into a comic shop in your life, we used to be able to go into CVS. We used to be able to go into your local drugstores, your local convenience stores, and you would see comics everywhere. You'd be able to grab them there. There needs to be a digital newsstand. I don't know what the answer is for that. How you reach that crowd with it, but there needs to be a way to reach out to a brand new crowd that never touches them before and browses and casually gets to look at them. And until we do that, we're constantly going to be shifting around the current comic market. Sure, we bring in people. I think we're the best ambassadors for comics. It's really important that we remain those ambassadors. The fact that you're talking about people at work, about comics, trying to get them interested. Here's the thing. Maybe that conversation didn't work on any of them at that moment. But who knows? Out of, 3 people you talk to? If one of them goes into a bookstore and ends up picking up Walking Dead, just for an example, and goes, Jim was talking about how cool this was. Maybe I will give it a shot. You've done your piece, and I think you're helping keep the medium going. So by the fact that you just offer those options and tell people how cool that stuff is, or Star Wars, that stuff, that's a great impulse purchase, right? Going after the movies. I'm a big geek of that. I go to a movie that was really cool. I walk into a bookstore or something, or a comic shop, and they've got a collected edition of something like Star Trek. I'll use that as an example. I've never been a big Star Trek comic guy. I love Star Trek. I love the TV shows. I love the films. Never been a big one for Star Trek comics. I casually pick up novels. Star Wars, I'm the different. If it's Star Wars, I'll grab it. I'm like salivating toward. I love Star Trek, so this is not a knock on Star Trek. The comics have been I pick them up, casually here and there. When I see a movie, though, if I walk out, they have they got trades of Star Wars or Star Trek comics? I've got to read them, man. That movie was so cool. It is funny how I'm very driven by the visual medium to do that. I still maintain that there's missed opportunities after a lot of these properties go to the big screen, and even on the television screen, to get them into comic shops, or to get them to bookstores, or to get them online shopping for these comics now, because the online's a medium for it, and to start developing a new crowd. It's not going to be everybody who watches these things, but I don't see that olive branch outreach to that crowd to make it easy for them to access it. Give them a starting point. Hey, you should be reading this trade, and here's an offer, a code to save as a first-time buyer. Get this flash trade for $2 as a first-time buyer. You're going to take a hit financially on doing that the first time, but you're really aiming for that casual crowd because the rest of us already got it.
Yeah.
I want new readers. I want new readers because I want this around. So the price point's an interesting issue that he brings up. Jim, he's talking about annuals, and it's funny how he talks about, annuals have kind of been really linked to series in recent years, where they are a part of the series, or they're, a kickoff to a storyline, or an integral part of the storyline. It's an extended part of a storyline. I like both options. He's got a point. It would be nice to know that, hey, this is a done-in-one story. Now, I'll pick them up anyway because I'm picking up the series. But, I read a lot of comic universes. I don't read every single book of every comic universe that I collect. It's nice to know when you walk in, like, hey, you're a Marvel fan. You collect all of Marvel's books. You're just itching for a good Superman story. This is a done-in-one Superman annual. You've been hearing good things about the book. Pick this up. Even if you never read another Superman book, you get a complete story. His point's well met. I don't know that annuals necessarily need to be restricted to singleton stories, but he is right. It'd be nice for people walking and casually browsing in a comic shop, or even digitally a digital browse, knowing that, hey, it'd be great to walk to, let's go to Comixology, for example. Done-in-one stories, and be able to shop through and kind of go, I haven't read Captain America. We'll just use Marvel as an example. I haven't read Captain America in a while. Here's a single done-in-one Captain America story. I haven't read DC in a while. Here's a great Batman story. He mentioned that Ace the Bat Hound story. That'd be a great one to read, for somebody who hasn't been reading Batman in ages. And just to get a feel for what is the tone, the way that DC is handling these characters now, and I think that those annuals are a great opportunity. Those are jump-on points, because you can either make the decision after to go, Spider's doing some really cool things. I want to continue on. Where do I go from here? And the annual should have in the back where the, synopsis of here's where Batman is right now. You want to read more? Go have at it. Here's what you need in order to do it. I think that's a good jump-on point, and I would love to see that in annuals. He's right on how good those were, though. Oh my gosh, that Ace the Bat Hound and Superman and Swamp Thing. He's right. They really are the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup of the DC universe. They're two tastes that you kind of look at it like, man, that just seems icky. But boy, when you put those two together, Because I do get kind of like, okay, they're doing Superman and Swamp Thing again. Great. Man, that was awesome. I really do walk in kind of going, I don't want to say I'm underwhelmed. I'm liking the creators right now a lot, so I have confidence in them. But I don't walk in going, kicking my heels together, going, yay, finally, these two are teaming up again, until I read the story. And he's right. Usually when you've got great writers on them, they just seem to know what to do with those two when you put them together. And I think it is because they're odd.
Yeah, it's the salt and sweet, it's like the chocolate covered bacon. That is just the greatest combination ever, because that salty bacon, because bacon's awesome no matter what, but you add the sweet chocolate to it. I love that. And it's two things that you initially think, oh, they shouldn't go well together. They go great together and they fit and it works. With the annuals, it's interesting because I am kind of two minds. Young sensei and old sensei. When I was young, I used to hate that if it was a completely standalone story. I wanted the continuation of the story. I wanted it, maybe the capstone, the cap, the end story, the final piece of this big long event occur in a double size annual. I'm like, yeah, this would be great. But now as I get older, I'm starting to appreciate more these standalone stories, especially now you look at a lot of these titles that have the 2 issues per month. When you have a title that's already has 2 issues a month, you add that annual in there, you can really have fun with it and let your creators do it. And you can do a couple standalone stories inside 1 issue. And I kind of like when I get that now.
They got to be good, though, because the annual before, here's the thing with, and I'm going to actually totally agree with something you just said there. When I was younger, annuals were real hit and miss with me. Some of them I hated. I was like, oh, why are you doing this to me? I want to read my book. I want to know, continue the story for me. Because a lot of times the annual featured creators that were not doing the main book. So when that happened, it was kind of like completely divorced from what was going on. I didn't feel the tone even. Or the art was not necessarily up to snuff with the main title. On the other hand, when you got a really cool creator who maybe was following what was going on with the main title, and a really good artist maybe doing something, or it was the current creative team that really, came in and delivered a home run on that annual, even if it was an isolated story, it made it well worth it. So it really, quality is the important part of that. If annuals are just throwaway and just thrown out there to be a cash cow, well, that part, that comes off really fast. And you kind of look at that and go, oh, okay, yeah, great, thanks. Another annual that kind of hits me at that point. That part, you feel like you're cheated because the quality is not quite there. But when you put the right creative team on there, whether it's the main one that's currently on the book or somebody that, just really pitched a really cool story, they're well worth it. And I think annuals have jumped up in quality in recent years, where I agree with everything. He was basically salivating over these annuals the same way I was. These were really well-developed stories that could only be told in that format because they took advantage of the page count. And that's really important. You got to deliver a story that you feel like you couldn't really do this well in the main title. You could do it as kind of a 2-parter, but it still wouldn't have the same impact as being able to read it as a contained, complete story. And I think that's what you need to do with an annual if you're going to do it. Either have it connected to the main book where you're delivering some meat and potatoes to a main arc, or do these really cool done-in-one stories where you can hand it to somebody and go, dude, you may never read Batman again, but you're going to dig this story. You may never read Superman again, but this team up with Swamp Thing just plain rocks. So that's pretty an important part of that. Are you watching Powerless?
I've actually recorded it. I haven't had a chance to sit down and watch it yet.
I was behind on it, and I started watching it recently. It's funny. It's a good show. I really like it. He makes an interesting point right now about how there's a lot of superhero shows or superhero-related shows. I'm really glad to see that. I'm glad to see we're seeing more DC shows up there that I'm really digging at the moment. Marvel shows, the same thing. I've been watching on Netflix recently. I jumped into Iron Fist, which I don't know what the general fan consensus is of it. I saw some negative reviews of it where people didn't like it. I also saw some negative reviews on sites about it. I actually quite like. I'm a big Iron Fist fan. Iron Fist and Marvel Team Up was one of my early remembrances of comics was a Marvel Team Up story going way back to the original Marvel Team Up series of Spider-Man and Iron Fist. That wasn't my first book I ever read, but it was one that stands out as an early one. And it was a two-parter that, like, I only read the first part, and then, like, I couldn't find the second part because we didn't have comic shops. You know, that was an era where it was like you literally went into I remember going to French's Pharmacy, I got this, read this story, and there was this part where, like, at the end, Iron Fist lost his power. Like, his symbol that's on his chest was, like, taken away, and this bad, evil Iron Fist, I'm forgetting the name of the guy, he wound up absorbing his power. And the cliffhanger was that he was ready to face off against Spider-Man and Iron Fist with Iron Fist's power. So, like, I'm sitting here like, this was my cliffhanger I was left with. And for years, I had this story in my head, like, I finished the story in my own mind, how it was going to continue. It didn't end the way I expected, but I really liked the story. Great artwork. It was a classic story, but I was a big Iron Fist fan because of that. Ended up reading Power Man and Iron Fist and stuff like that when it came out. It just became a character that I ended up enjoying and following. So Netflix does this Iron Fist series. I guess it's funny when you walk into something with low expectations, because you'd seen some negative reviews. I went and I'm like, I'm really enjoying this. I'm like, this isn't bad at all. It's not my favorite of the Netflix Marvel series, but I am finding it to be an enjoyable ride for Iron Fist. I'm hoping that I'm right now halfway through it. There's 13 episodes, and I just finished episode 6. So far what I've been reading what I've been watching, I should say, has been really good. But my point with all that is there's a lot of interesting television out there with in the superhero genre and comics in general. Preacher's out there. He mentioned Powers being taken off of PlayStation. I hate that was taken off of PlayStation, because that was a series that I was really enjoying and what was going on PlayStation with that one. They did an original series for the PlayStation network, or when they were doing original video for that. And that was a series that they were trying to drum up interest in exclusive content. And I'm sad that some of that, I think the competition between Netflix and Hulu and all those others, there was no reason for Sony to go into that point. I'm sure Xbox probably doesn't do original programming, or if they do, it's isolated like they are in PlayStation now, because I think people are using those as a delivery medium for your Netflix and your Hulu and things like that, versus going to it for original content. I didn't buy my PlayStation to watch Powers. I thought it was really cool, though, that, like, I was able to watch Powers on my PlayStation. So I'm sad to see that content go, because I did think it was cool, exclusive content. It was free with your PlayStation Plus membership. It was kind of a cool thing to watch. Krypton's going to be cool. I'm excited for that one. The Krypton series. I don't know a whole lot about it other than the fact that it's going to be, I think, Superman's grandfather is going to be one of the featured characters. So it predates Jor-El, is from my understanding. But I haven't really seen too much about it otherwise.
Yeah, I haven't read much on it. Obviously I'm in on it, when it hits, so, but right now I don't know. And I'm curious because you think about just like the movies have taken some hits. The Superman, Batman movies, we loved it, but a lot of people are still panning it. And there's still a lot of the anti-DC and the anti-comments on it, and just that there's still a lot of hate out there. And I'm worried that that's going to affect, the TV show. Like, it didn't really affect The Flash or Green Arrow or Legends or any of the other really cool DC Gotham that we have out there. But I'm wondering, just because of Krypton, because of, it looks like Superman took the blunt of the hate. He and Ben Affleck, took the main brunt, the main brunt force of the hate, when it came to the Superman Batman. That's the thing I'm worried about.
I wouldn't be.
People
Supergirl.
Are going to.
Supergirl, I think, trumps that.
True.
Because it's a TV series, and Universal Supergirl, I haven't seen anything negative about Supergirl.
No.
So I think there's an advantage of Krypton kind of being predated by Supergirl. Versus just the films, and it being a TV series versus a series of films. I think it'd be in bigger danger if it was like, and this is the first of a film trilogy about Krypton. I think you're in big trouble. Yeah, because of what you're talking about. Wonder Woman really is a film to watch for DC. You and I, you're right. I've been enjoying the film universe. I particularly like the director's cuts when they release them. It's I thought that Batman v Superman was a far better film in the extended edition than the one in the theaters. But I liked both. But you can't argue with the fact that that's not a universal consensus. Suicide Squad, which I laughed my way through and I really thought was DC's Guardians of the Galaxy, that also had mixed reviews. So it's an interesting time for them. I think Wonder Woman really is a very important movie because it features the one character that pretty universally, when people talk about Batman v Superman, even if they hated it, they go, but Wonder Woman was cool. That's typically the one that people will go, I hated that movie, but the Gal Gadot was great. So I'm hoping Wonder Woman begins the shift. And I'm hoping that I get worried when I hear about a movie like Justice League having rewrites and different things like that. Not because I hope the rewrites are great, and I honestly hope that it's a tight, cohesive film, and I'm really excited about that. Rewrites can be a good thing. So being glass half full about it, this might turn out to be a far better film because of the rewrites. The problem is there's also the other side of the coin, which is an honest reality. What if the rewrites led to it being a disjointed film? I'm going to say because DC Entertainment in general has to recognize how important a film that one is too, that they have to get that one right. That's their biggie. That has to be their Avengers. I think there's a certain amount of pressure that might be a good thing, and I hope it is. I hope it winds up being that they've seen the shift. I hope they're taking a look at their TV properties and going, why are these so successful? Why do people, overall really seem to continue to keep enjoying these? It's because the TV properties have just been getting it right to a level that their film, as much as I'm loving them, I still will say my increased enjoyment comes from the television. What they're doing over on TV right now is amazing. And the films have got to catch up to that level, as much as I'm loving them. So I'm going to be curious to see what ends up happening with that. It's going to be interesting to see if shows like, Krypton, as you mentioned, if that gets an audience, or if it does. You're right. Hey, are you right? Is there a possibility because it's linked to Superman? The Superman, film universe has been kind of panned. I'm fingers crossed because I've been digging that stuff, and I hope that the TV show delivers a home run. I loved the Superman on Supergirl.
You know what? Actually, yeah, I dig that. And it's funny because as soon as you threw out Supergirl, I was like, yeah, because, Supergirl is really hitting non-comic fans.
Yeah.
Like my sister loves Supergirl. My mom loves Supergirl. They're watching the show, and my sister's never been a comic book fan. It's, with me and my brothers, we were all comic book fans. Mary never was. She loves Supergirl. She's constantly watching that, and she and I are talking about it. They had the musical episode, which was absolutely amazing. Oh God, that was hysterical and wonderful. The Supergirl Flash musical episode crossover, that was spectacular. But so they're that universe right there is hitting on all cylinders. So they could very easily cross over. The Supergirl fans could give Krypton a try, and we'll see. It's one of those things where I am eagerly anticipating it. I'm curious what they're going to do. I'm always worried whenever something like this comes out, just because I'm like, I don't want them to ruin anything. I don't want, because we as comic book fans have a tendency to destroy something before it's even created. And, case in point was the Wonder Woman TV show got destroyed before it was ever even created based on images and what we thought the plot was going to be. It got panned by the comic fans and it never got made. So we can be our own worst enemy, where we just immediately go on the offensive and immediately say something is horrible even before the first episode's out. Those are the kind of stuff I'm always worried about, people doing that and people destroying this. And, we as quote unquote fans need to enjoy the property.
Well, it's interesting how, and I may have been in the Facebook group that there was a thread that was going on that I just saw today And if it wasn't the Facebook group, I saw it on Facebook in general. There was a thread talking about humor in trying to put humor into the DC movies. I think just humor in comic properties in general, meaning when they go to live action. And does there need to be humor? And the argument was, by some people were saying no, and I agree with that, actually. I don't think you have to put in humor for the sake of putting in humor. I think that can feel forced. You mentioned an interesting episode of Supergirl. That was fun. The Supergirl sing-along episode. And dance episode, I should say, and that whole beat. I loved that episode. It was fun. It wasn't slapstick for the sake of it. There was actually a storytelling reason for it. And I think there's a point to doing those things where you can take a look. Well, both shows have their own serious turn as well. What's going on in The Flash right now, you could argue, is it's a very, very, very serious story.
Yes.
That's the piece that, you could take a look at that and go, but The Flash has had many funny moments and many fun moments on that show. And Barry still remains a likable guy, but the show's gone to some very dark places without going too dark. I think you need to know the balance of fun. I think Batman v Superman, one of the criticisms that I can see the point of. You and I read so much comics, and we've seen so many takes on Superman and Batman now in the 11 years we've done this show. Throughout our lives, you've been a Superman reader before we did this podcast. We've seen different takes on the characters that, and even look at Christopher Reeve and things like that, you've seen all of that. If your early exposure, or even you're revisiting Batman v Superman visiting Batman and Superman is Batman v Superman, very dark take. And there's not a lot of smiling moments in that movie. I get that point. Where is the fun of these characters? And there's a point to putting that in there. But I think that comes from fun stories. I look at the cinema universe that's going on for DC right now. I think Wonder Woman's a turn to where you can have a story that's going to be fun. I think Steve Trevor is going to have, I've seen funny lines with him. I hope they don't go too far with that, because I like that. I love the actor Chris Pine. I think he's a great actor. I really enjoy him in Star Trek. I think he's a great choice to be Steve Trevor, especially considering the era that they're doing. I think he has the right look for it. So I'm very excited and optimistic for that film. I just hope it has the right balance of fun. It doesn't have to be slapstick. I just want fun. I want to enjoy it. And I want action. I want adventure. I want to feel like it's a serious story that isn't dumbed down for me. I want to be excited about that. And I think it's finding that right balance of parts that the cinema universe has been lacking, not for me, but I think globally. And you want these things to be successful globally to a large audience. Not that they have a huge hit their first couple weeks out, but that people go back for 3 and 4 viewings that are casual, and all of a sudden they start talking about these properties in that way. So I'm hoping Wonder Woman does that. I'm hoping the TV, like Krypton, I'm hoping Krypton makes people, that one's one I think it's going to be interesting because of the fact that it's a planet, not a particular character. I'm going to be curious to see how that one does in the ratings. I think that's probably the bigger danger is the planet, because you don't have, Superman's not on that show. Supergirl's not on that show. You're going to Superman's grandparents. So you're going to an era right now where we're not going to see a lot of familiar faces. Even Jor-El, if you called the show Jor-El, I don't think we're going to go, finally, I get to watch a show about Jor-El. We'd go salivate over that. It's kind of like the Thomas Wayne show. You and I would watch that, but what do people like about Gotham? It's the fact that you've got Commissioner Gordon. You do have Bruce Wayne. You have all of the Rogues Gallery. You mentioned your sister watching and your mom watching Supergirl. My dad, before he passed away, was watching Gotham and loved it. My brother was watching it. Now, again, these are two people, they didn't care for comics. That might have been my fault. but it was great to talk to them about these programs because they were geared for that purpose. So I'm hoping Krypton has that kind of crossover appeal. I do love when people call in and they talk about things like books that they're enjoying. He was mentioning Suicide Squad and things like that. Are you still digging that book as much as I am?
Oh God, yeah, I'm loving that book, and Wonder Woman, the Wonder Woman title itself, I'm absolutely loving. So I was sitting there and I'm like, I want to talk about all these stuff right now. I think that's a cool part of what the universe is doing right now, that it's not just I'm enjoying reading it. When I'm reading this stuff, I'm going, man, that'll be fun to talk about. I missed that Rooker was leaving. Yeah, I didn't see that either.
I got to admit, I've had to been living in a cave because I'm just looking online for it, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff. And it starts going back to the controversy about the artist and all that kind of thing. I don't want to get into all that, but it's funny when you're enjoying it. Like we enjoyed the Brian Azzarello run a great deal, and then Greg Rucka came onto the book later on. I'm actually skipping quite a bit of the Finches being on the book, which I quite enjoyed as well. When you're enjoying a run, like I'm really enjoying Greg Rucka's run. What does that mean for you when a new writer comes on? Do you get worried? Because I gotta admit, I'm really digging this run right now. So it won't make me drop the book. It does make me, like, I'm salivating. I want to know now, when is that going to happen? And what is the plan? Like, who is taking over? Because this is a title that's one of my favorite right now. So I'm digging what's going on in Wonder Woman. And I want the quality to continue. I'm fine with somebody new coming on board. That happens in comics all the time, right? A run ends, and a writer, for whatever reason, and I always hope it's a pleasant one, writer, artist, whatever, ends up leaving a book. I hope it's a pleasant reason. But when it happens, I want what comes next to be just as good or to surpass what I'm currently reading. So I haven't heard anything about this one. How does that affect you?
I get worried, and I get worried until, sometimes until I hear who's taking over. Like, for example, if I hear, okay, Gail Simone's taking over, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll immediately calm down and say, yes, this will be good. But if I don't know who's taking over, especially when I'm really loving a story and I'm really loving a writer, which is the case currently with Wonder Woman, I'm absolutely loving the job he's doing. And it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, man. Oh, why are they leaving? And it's, you get a little, that little tumbly in your stomach, and you're just like, oh no, what's going to happen? And like you, I hope it's for positive reasons, and it's, something good, like they've got some of the other projects are working or whatnot, and it's, when those kind of situations happen, then my thought process is, when Jeff Johns left Superman, I was like, oh, that's going to be a tough one. Or when Gale left Wonder Woman, that was another time I was like, oh, man, that's going to be a tough one for whoever is the following act on that. And, I don't know if this is that situation, because this is really the first I'm hearing of it. And I don't know if it's actually going to be, because if there's some controversy or whatnot, so then I really get, I'm like, when people are when you take a creator off a book before they're ready to leave, or before they plan on leaving.
Do you want to hear some of the comments for this one?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm really not trying to be rude with that. I found an article about this one. This one comes from comicbook.com. So Rucka took to his Tumblr to tell fans they'd be leaving the title with issue number 25, and so is the artist. He said it's due to the strain of the twice monthly schedule. So that's going to be his last issue for the time being. He said, I just can't maintain the pace on the title while also fulfilling my commitments to my other collaborators. It is genuinely as simple as that. So it sounds like, hey, I'm hoping that's not just a line, just kind of like, hey, this is just, kind of not my thing. I guess there was a 2-year plan for the book, though. So I'm hoping that we get to see some of that play out, while at the same time not having the new creative team shackled. I think you want people to be able to have some creative freedom to, follow a direction, with the characters and take them somewhere. I want it to be good. Yeah. I really do. I've been really enjoying this book. I will say this is a character since the start of the New 52 I've been very interested in. I've really enjoyed what's been going on with Wonder Woman. She's done very well in the New 52, and I think that they've managed to evolve the character. Now with where she is with Rebirth, she's a lot closer to the character that we were reading before in the universe. But they've continued to put some new tenets in for this character that I think have been highly interesting for Wonder Woman, and I've been really enjoying reading this character. So I'm anxious to see where it goes from here, and I just hope they get somebody good on the book. A good writer, a good artist to deliver really good stories. That's important to me.
Amen.
So that's the part that's interesting. So we'll see from there. And I'm sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. I finally found an article. I'm like, yes, I can finally speak to this. It's in June 28th, issue 25 is going to be the final issue.
Yeah, and again, good luck to the person who's got to follow him, because you got big shoes to follow, and you're following a great story. And one hand, it's good to follow a great story because it's one of those where there's already there's going to be a solid fan base behind it. But the bad thing is you're following a really good story and a really good writer, and it's you can't tell the new people you have to continue on with exactly what his plan was, because then you're going to get ruck-a-light, and you don't want that. You want them to tell their own story. You want them to actually do what the story they want to do, but you don't want to throw everything out. And that's the hard part. That's the thing that tests, and, it makes it, with multiple, with multiple creative teams, going from one to another. It's like a Green Arrow had that problem where, you'd get some good stories going. They change creative, and you got to get,
Yes.
Let's get the groove going again. Oh, okay. Now we change again. Oh, let's go. You got to have a consistency and a nice formal plan, a nice long-term plan on for a character.
I appreciate new writers when they come on to a book. I don't mind if they have their own direction they're going in, but they don't throw out what came before. And there's a natural transition. Green Arrow is a great example of a book that I really enjoyed the creative teams that were working on Green Arrow since the New 52 started. But every time I got into a run, it seemed like somebody else was coming in, and it was jarring. Like, went in a completely different direction with the character. I was like, okay, so who is Green Arrow? And I really am enjoying, like, right now, I will fight somebody that changes the team that's going on Green Arrow at the moment, because I'm gleefully enjoying this series right now. So I hope... that's when a comic starts to really develop a flow like Wonder Woman has. You want that flow to continue. And you want that excitement to be generated each month. Because this is a character who is near and dear to me. I really enjoy the character, and I want that too. So best of luck first of all, thank you to Greg Rooker and the current team, because they've been delivering a bang-up comic. Leaving that book in a place that I think is really interesting for somebody to take over and run with. So I'm hoping they find somebody that can do that. That's interesting with this twice monthly schedule that he mentions. The effect that it has not only on the writer, but on the art teams that are going there. It's a different sort of pace. Because you typically think of the artist's pace. You don't think of the writer's pace when you're talking about that. And you're still developing two scripts. And that's if you're only doing that book. If you're doing other work, which Greg Rooker does do other work, that tends to divide that piece as well. So it's an interesting piece that you normally think of as more of an effect on the art team than the writer. It brings up an interesting point in this type of thing. And I'm enjoying the twice a month delivery. So it's an interesting problem.
Reaching melting point. Not sure we can make it.
I want to remind everyone about our show website, RagingBullets.com. That's the place to find out when our new episodes are going to be released and what's going on content-wise for the show. And actually, we've got I'll share it at the end of the show, we got a lot of great episodes planned for you coming up, because we're getting back in the groove, and I'm excited, especially as we're heading on the road to 500. So this tail end, we got some big episodes planned for you. So thank you for sticking with us. That always feeds into Twitter. That feeds into our Facebook page. We've got a Facebook group community. I know I shout it out all the time. And I say we. The we is a much larger sense. Jeremy and the whole crew over there do such a wonderful job of... It's daily conversation that's over there. It really is their community, and I love those people over there. I check in there to see what's going on with DC News. Not just DC, though. They talk about video games, talk about comics, they talk about podcasts, blogs, everything you could possibly want to know about geek culture. The thing is, they're fans, and it's not a whiny, complainy group. It's an exciting group. And it's nowadays, I think it's almost old hat to talk about the negative side of the internet. I think, people like that crew have taken it back, because I'm finding my experiences more and more now on the internet. I'm excited to go on. There's people that aren't afraid to geek out over there now. And that's one of the communities that I'm just proud to be a part of, because they've taken it, made it their own, and it's their community. I just visit. And I'm proud to say that, because there's such a cool group of people to hang out with. So thank you to those guys over there. We're on Google+. I have a PlayStation Network account. It's Raging_Bullets. I'm also on the Nintendo account. I'm drnorge over there, but I think Mitomo is the easiest way to get me. And I will admit, feel free to shoot me an email. It's ragingbullets@icloud.com. Feel free to send me an email if you want to get linked up with me on Nintendo. They're not as easy to get. This isn't a knock on Nintendo. They're kind of notorious for having these friend codes and things like that. I'm always glad to add anybody who's on the podcast or for friends of the show, into my group. So please feel free to add me. I'm just not as good with it with Nintendo because I'm mainly a PlayStation guy who's been digging the Switch lately. So good stuff over there. So those are the ways to find us. Jim, we are sponsored as always by DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. What's going on over at DCBService.com?
Well, DCBS always has some great combos for us. They got our bundles, and they continue doing the bundle support, and it's appreciated. But also, DCBS is a great place for action figures, for statues. You get some great discounts on it. I know they've got T-shirts, they've got apparel. It's your online local comic book shop. Whatever you go get at your local shop, you can find at DCBS. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Chad Cicconi's got work over on InStockTrades.com. I was just doing a search, and this is something you can do over at InStockTrades.com. I really love it. You do a search for Chad Cicconi, and his work pops up. First thing pops up, there's Fracture Trade Paperback Volume 1, Altered Egos. And Jim and I talk about Fracture quite a bit on the show. We enjoyed it previously, but we've referenced the book multiple times because of how much we dig it. We had Chad on previously. That's $8.96 for the trade paperback for the first volume of Fracture. You can get that over at InStockTrades.com. So continue to shop through our sponsor for that. I do want to remind everyone, May 10th is going to be the release of Blue Hour. So if you haven't read it, it's a great opportunity to get it in trade format. It is available on Comixology now. The complete series is over there. So it's a great opportunity to be able to get Blue Hour if you haven't gotten it before. Please let your local comic shop know if you are looking for it and they don't have it. They can order it and get it for you. But please support Chad. Chad's been a longtime friend of the show. I'm a big fan of his work, and he's just another really cool creator that I'm glad to be associated with. So thank you. I want to thank him actually for coming on the show and having an opportunity to chat with him about this work. Then thank you to DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for supporting our show. Jim, our next episode, I'm excited. We're going to be talking about the Bat. Anytime we can talk about the Bat. Actually, we've got 2 episodes we're going to be talking about the Bat. We're going to jump on first and talk about the I Am Bane complete storyline from start to finish, which I realized that you and I had gotten away from talking full storylines on the show. We hadn't had an opportunity to really do that in a while. So it was nice with Superman to kind of go and do that and do a focused episode on that. Now we're going to do it with Batman. I'd like to do the same thing with Wonder Woman. But before we get to Wonder Woman, we got to talk 2-parter with Batman. We're going to talk about I Am Bane, and we're going to talk about, I think it's going to be the first 3 parts, depending on when we record, of the storyline about the button with the Flash, the crossover. So we're going to talk about those 2 on the next couple episodes of Raging Bullets. We've got some guests lined up. They're going to be coming on the show. We are going to do a Wonder Woman focused episode where we talk about a recent Wonder Woman storyline. We're also going to do the crossover going on in Titans. We're going to do the Deathstroke crossover that's coming over there. So it's going to be Titans, Teen Titans, and Deathstroke is doing a crossover. And I just think, historically wise, I've always loved when you put those characters together in a story arc. So you suggested this one. Actually, I totally agree with you that we're going to be doing that in an upcoming episode. So we got a lot of content coming your way, storyline-wise, we're going to talk about on the show. So we will see everyone next episode.
Bye!
On November 13th, Sean Whalen was asked to stop constantly talking about comic books. That request came from his wife. Deep down, he knew she was right, but he also knew that someday he would find someone that would talk to him. With nowhere else to go, he appeared at the home of his childhood friend Jim Segulin. Sometime earlier, Segulin's boss had requested that he shut up about his comic books and never speak of them again. Can 2 grown men put out a DC Comics podcast without driving each other crazy? It's Raging Bullets, the DC Comics fan podcast. With Sean Whalen as Dr. Norge, and Jim Segulin as the Sensei of the Whatnot and the Duke of You Know. It's a spoiler podcast, so they will go in depth into the plotline, story twists, and whatnot of the comics they are reviewing. So if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you may better enjoy the show.